General fund.
Why don't we get started this evening? I'll start off by opening up the meeting for the Town of Hamilton Board of Selectmen meeting for February 3rd, 2020, with joint meeting with the Finance Committee to review the fiscal year 2021 budget and review.
And on the same exact date and for the same purpose, I call the Hamilton Finance Advisory Committee to order.
All right, why don't we start off with a Pledge of Allegiance, please? Pledge of
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I know we have one item on the agenda tonight, right, which is the budget and discussion. And first of all, I wanted to thank all of you for all of the hard work I know that it takes to put this together. Budgets are difficult undertakings no matter what the circumstances, but then you throw in the fact that it's a municipal government, and that just puts a lot of twists and curves. And, so I know it takes a lot of work, and I hope you know how much it's appreciated. And thank you for being here tonight as well.
And FinCom will reserve judgment on all of that.
All right, so Joe.
Okay, thank you everybody for being here tonight. I just wanted to, like Jeff, I wanted to thank everybody that has helped during this budget process, in particular our department heads, most of whom are here tonight. Chief Stevens is on his way. He had another engagement that was going to make him a little tardy, but he should be here later this evening. And we also wanted to thank some of the boards and committees, such as the Planning Board, Council on Aging, Board of Health, Community Preservation Committee, and the new Capital Committee, who all, in their own ways, assisted in this development of this. We're here tonight to review the budget proposal for fiscal year 21 for the Town of Hamilton. And as was suggested a few minutes ago, this has not been an easy budget year. We recognize that there are several competing interests and needs to provide the high quality of services that Hamilton residents have come to expect. And at the same time, we recognize the need to live within our means in municipal government. The budget tonight, we're going to go over kind of a high-level preview here in a few minutes, and then you'll be able to ask questions or ask department heads questions. But this budget tonight, we believe, adheres to our financial policies and provides appropriate reserves to guard against outside budgetary factors, but also utilizes unused tax levy capacity. This is also not likely the final budget. It represents a recommendation of how we can continue to provide the same level of town services, recognizing that we will continue to work with the department heads, the Select Board, and the Finance Committee in our run-up to town meeting. The budget proposal does include the current regional school district budget request. We'll be working with you to determine the best way to move forward once we know what the final approved adopted school budget is after February 12th. As presented, this budget does propose an override in order to meet that current proposed school department budget. A couple of things to keep in mind. On the town side of the budget, we are proposing a modest increase in spending of about 2% total. This increase in spending includes transfers to stabilization accounts and capital projects, and it also includes several town departments that saw operational line item reductions, including the Finance Department, Highway Department, Parks, Conservation, Assessors, and Treasurer departments, as well as a reduction in our spending and debt. In real dollars, this proposed budget on the town side is about $272,000 increase. The school budget is currently requesting a 12.5% increase. In real dollars, that equals about $2.3 million in real dollars over last year's budget. In order to balance this request, the town would have to use about $850,000 of unused tax levy capacity and seek an override of just under $732,000. Without an override or the use of unused levy capacity, the town could afford an increase of approximately $793,000, or a little under 5%. I would like to stress that this budget proposal is based on what we know as of this moment in time. Like I said, the schools still haven't adopted their final budget, and we are continuing to analyze the town budget for additional savings in some areas, and those savings could be factored in as we get closer to finalizing the warrant and the budget request for town meeting. But this is where we stand at this moment, so bear with us. Be kind. I'm going to go through these slides mostly. I'll ask a little bit for Marissa's help because she's better at this stuff than me. The fiscal year 2021 budget proposal is in total $35,662,913 in total spending for town and schools. It's a total increase in spending of $2,656,842. And it will require an override, as I said a minute ago, of approximately $732,000. The split between town and schools includes a regional school district increase of, I just went over this again, so I'm repeating myself, but a regional school district increase of $2,375,293 and a town increase of $272,362. The town increase includes $645,428 in funding for stabilization and capital stabilization funds per our adopted town policies. Those would be coming out of free cash. Contingency fund for negotiation, so this slide talks about some of the factors that led to our development of this budget. We have included, as we did last year, contingency fund for negotiations with 2 collective bargaining units. The addition of a full-time firefighter, which we have partly covered with savings and other line items in the fire department budget. A projected increase of 20% for workers' compensation costs, a projected increase of 7% for health insurance costs, the negotiated salary increases from last year's budgets, a $67,000 projected increase in costs for joint programs. We have denied in this process requests for programming and additional funding in the police department, health department, and council on aging. And we have reduced our debt spending by several $100,000. This last bullet has a very controversial one, but I will note that the recent change in trash program has helped us maintain our projected spending for this current year at the same level as last year. All right. I'm going to step out here so I can see what I'm looking at here. This is an FY20 to FY21 comparison change in budget. You'll see the operating budget for the towns is 2.8%, like we mentioned earlier. Financial reserves we've reduced. The reduction there is related to the fact that last year we were starting up the capital stabilization fund, and with the adoption of the new financial policies, we put additional money into the stabilization fund and the capital stabilization fund than were required. We're more on track with what the financial policies recommends this year, given that it's a lean budget year. We're trying to stay to our policies but not go over that. So the increase into those funds is total $645,000, but that is less money than we spent in this area last year. In our capital budget, we're recommending $507,000 of spending out of free cash. When we get to that slide, you'll see we're actually spending a little bit more than that, but 2 of the vehicles that we're going to recommend purchasing, we're going to purchase through a lease program. We're going to lease it rather than purchase, and so the funding for that is in the departmental budgets. This total, and then there's the school department budget. You'll see again, the school department budget's a 12.5% increase, but the total increase over last year is only 8%. That's due to what we've been able to find savings on our town side. And as you see, the bottom is the revenues. It matches. It all lines up like it's supposed to. So again, we're using about $1.3 million of free cash. Some of that is for capital budgets, and some of that is for the required financial reserves transfers. This is another budget overview page that shows you FY20 to FY21. So the FY20 is what was approved and what we finally have to spend, and the FY21 is where we're at right now. And the bottom line, unused capacity, projected deficit, you'll see that we have a deficit, $731,865. If we fund the budget of the schools as it currently stands, that's the money that we'd have to seek in an override. Town budget breakdown. We wanted to show you where your funding goes. As you'll see, just under 60% of the budget goes to support our schools, which is very similar to most cities and towns around the state. That's not unusual. We are spending about 9.4% on public safety, 6.6% on general government, 5.8% on public works, just 3% on culture and recreation, and 1% on health and human services. The unclassified is things like, help me out, Marissa, it's debt service, health insurance, unemployment costs, things like that. So things that wouldn't normally find a budget line item somewhere else. And our revenues. You'll see here that property taxes accounts for 87% of your revenues, but it's actually a little more grim than that, because if you add in motor vehicle excise tax at 3% and local receipts at 2.5%, really 94% of your budget comes from your taxpayers here locally. That is a lot. It's more than a lot of other cities and towns. We have no commercial tax base, and because of the relative wealth of the community, we get virtually no help from the state. You know what, I'll go back, talking about that, we'll go back one. If you look here under total revenue, after it accounts for the top portion accounts for the local revenue, previous levy limit, the 2.5 override, the new growth, but down under that it says state aid. You'll notice we're budgeting the exact same amount as last year, and only a very modest increase in local receipts. So, which is offset by a decrease in other available funds. So we're not really getting any help from anybody but ourselves. This is the capital budget slide that I told you about. We're spending we're put $250,000 into the budget for a fuel system. Now, at the last Selectmen's meeting, you may recall that I said that we're going to be looking into sharing fueling with the town of Wyndham. We'd still need to ultimately, at the end of the pilot program, build a joint fueling facility. So we're just going to keep that number right there. But Wyndham's carrying a similar number in their budget so that we can build it together and maintain it together going forward. We have a need to replace a boiler at the public safety building, and one line cruiser. That's the one real vehicle that we kept here. The highway department for national pollutant discharge is a federal requirement. We really have no choice but to follow the storm sewer systems upgrade to MS4. Patton Park redevelopment is to help with drainage at Patton Park so that the park is more usable and that more of that water flows to the pond as it's supposed to, instead of collecting on the field.
Is that going to be a catch basin or something? We discussed kind of catch basin and some swale and stuff like that. Is it going to be something in that vein?
The ECO repeaters, our ECO repeaters are way past, no, repeaters what helps the radio signal bounce around time. It's well past its useful life. In fact, when we have to have it repaired, we have to hope that the company that comes in to repair it has spare parts that they've garnered from other towns' old systems that they've gotten rid of, because there are no more available parts on the market. So this was one of the higher recommendations that came out of the Capital Committee. They recommended that we do this year. And they actually indeed recommended that we do all of it this year because they didn't see the sense of piecemeal in it, just trying to get it all done. And below that line, $507,000 is the other two vehicle that we're going to lease instead of buy.
And Joe, the cost of those leases
Is right there. So for the fire truck, it's
is
$40,000.
from, I'm sorry, is from what, is it free cash?
It'll be in the operational budget for the two departments. So the $40,000 will be in the fire department's operational budget, and the $16,500 will be in the police department. And we'll have to carry that for 3 years in the police department and 5 years in the fire department budget. So switching gears a little bit, one of the other major budgets that's under our control is the Water Enterprise Fund. You'll see here that overall we've actually reduced the operating budget by 3.1%, but we do have a number of projects that we have been approving over the last couple of years. We do not have any new water department project requests in this year's budget. We have several from the last 2 or 3 budget years that we aren't finished with, and we figured it was time to take a little bit of a break and try and finish those projects before we come back. There will be, ultimately down the road, a need to do a Phase 5 water system upgrade and more work, but right now, we're trying to finish the projects we have and manage the debt service that we have on those asks. That debt service number will go up in the next couple of years as we bring more of those projects to fruition, so just be aware of that. In the capital budget this year is just a $60,000 line item. I'll show you those 3 programs there. It's a water storage tank. It's just concept design. Tim can talk more about that after the presentation's over. And a hydrant and gate valve replacement program and a meter replacement program. These are kind of ongoing every year. We carry them in the budget to be able to replace water meters and fire hydrants that have gone out of service. So again, just a 3.9% overall increase in the Water Enterprise Fund. So our financial reserves currently in free cash, we had certified in September of this year $3 million. With the proposed use of $1.3 million, that will leave us about $1.7 million in free cash, which is 4.9% of general fund operating. That is right about the target. Healthy from a auditing standpoint is having 5% of reserves in your free cash, and that'll give us just about that amount. Stabilization fund, that was the new, has not a new fund, but we added to it last year with the new financial policies. And that fund is currently at $1.16 million, and we're adding $257,000. When all combined, that'll give us about 4% of general funds. Our target on that is another 5%. So if we can have between the two, the stabilization fund and the free cash over the next year or two, if we can get that to be 5% and 5%, that'll be really healthy and help us maintain our bond rating and help us stay on the right side of the ledger in a lot of other areas. Financial reserves, capital stabilization fund. This was the new fund that was set up last year under the policies. You'll remember I said last year we spent more here. We transferred more from free cash here last year because we had it and because it was the first year of the fund. Our goal is to get to the total annual asset depreciation, which as of FY19 was $1.275 million. We would have about $890,000 in after this year's recommended transfer of $387,000. So that'll get us to about 70% of FY19 depreciation, which has us on the right track. It'll take us a few years to get there. We knew that when we started it, but to be at 70% would be a really good thing. And then the Water Enterprise Fund, we are projecting an ending balance in FY21 of $544,000, which is more than the target of 20% of the operations total budget. But again, given that we have so many large projects that are being bonded, we want to have more than 20% in there. So we are not using, for the second year in a row, we're not using any free cash to reduce the tax rate. This is sound budgeting philosophy, and I'm very happy that the FinCom and the Board of Selectmen endorsed this approach last year. They've been endorsing it over several years, actually. You've worked very hard to bring it down from where it had been a number of years ago. And we're in second year in a row, we're not using any money out of free cash. Free cash, you'll remember, is a one-time revenue source. It comes in at the end of the year when you true up what you budgeted and what you collected and against what you spent. And it varies. When there's a bad budget year, costs go higher than you expect. Lots of things happen and you wind up not having free cash. You don't want to plan recurring expenses to be funded out of free cash. So we're recommending they go into stabilization funds and be used to fund capital projects, which is what we're doing this year. And tax rate trend. This is the slide everybody hates. You'll see that our tax rate is going up again this year. But again, bear in mind where our budget's being driven this year. It's a big jump this year. That's if we fund the budget fully as it's been presented thus far.
Joe, when you say the full budget, what the schools full
right.
ask.
That's the school's full ask.
Full
That doesn't include the override. The 1798 would still not include the override, or would? It would. Okay, so 1798 is the worst case scenario. If we get a 12.5% increase from the schools and we decide to put it forward in whatever way we want to, and the taxpayers support it, you'd wind up with a $17.98 per thousand.
89.
89?
1789.
Yep,
Sorry.
11 cents.
Gain 9 cents, great.
Keep in mind that those are based on estimates. So if valuations were estimating that it would be a 2.5% increase for valuations, we're estimating there would be a $200,000 for new growth. I mean, these are all unknown numbers. So as of right now, it's just based on estimates. I
Okay.
want to make sure that
Sure.
because every time if we project that the tax rate is going to be a specific number and then it ends up being something different, I just want to everyone out there watching us, it's based on estimates. We're estimating at 2.5%, like I said, on valuations, 200 in new growth, and 200 for allowance of abatements. So those are our estimates as of today.
And just for the folks at home that are watching, all 5 of you maybe, as far as the tax rate certification, just that happens in December, right? We kind of started in October, and then by the time it's done, it's about halfway through the year.
I misspoke. I said 1798. Obviously, I meant 1789. Sorry.
Pardon me, if, at the school presentation last week.
Yep.
The current assumed budget was their maximum top of the line.
Right.
And they had an intermediate and then a low. The intermediate was 9 to 10%, So my question is, if it became 9 to 10%, where would that put us in terms of our ability to raise taxes with or without an override?
I think that, Marissa might come up and help me, but what we've been looking at so far is that what we could probably handle by just using free cash in the capital budget and using all of the available tax levy capacity, we might be able to get to somewhere between 7 and 8%, and anything over that would require an override. So the override number would be smaller than what's currently being shown here tonight, but there would need to be an override once you got up that high. The levy capacity would give us the ability to go a little higher than 5%, but we'd burn through, we'd have no levy capacity at all. Is that right? That's what we talked
Thank you.
about earlier? Just want to make sure I have my facts right.
So you're saying it's somewhere, we can absorb somewhere between 7 to 8%?
Yes.
Anything beyond that? or-
Yeah. Because, 5%'s about $900,000, and we said that right now, if we gave them 793%, that's under what we have $850,000 of unused levy capacity.
Approximately, I think about 880 in FY '20 of unused capacity, and that would probably mean that we would be using all of the town's unused capacity.
So that means anytime in the future, after this year, after this time meeting, when we needed we'd be at capacity. So next year's budget would be at capacity with a 2.5% increase. And then anything that was over 2.5% on a budget would require an override.
So it's likely if we got ourselves into an override posture for '21, that's likely to be a repetitive.
Very possible, very real possibility, without new growth. One of the things that can help us build levy capacity out down the road would be that, more new growth than we expected. So as Marissa noted, we're only budgeting for about $200,000 of new growth this year. We know that there might be some development that we don't know about yet that might open up. Since that's not built into the budget, that would be unused capacity in a future year. But to get back up to the $800,000 number, we'd require quite a bit of new development, so.
And historically, we haven't had that much new growth in town. For FY '20, I think our new growth number came in at $186,000. So we're estimating 200 just to be somewhat conservative and comparable to the FY '20.
We do know that the Canterbrook's going on, and it's gonna come online, so, we kind of feel very confident in that 200,000 number, we should get there. It might be a little bit more than that, but we don't wanna estimate all of that, because if it doesn't all sell this year, then we have to take it out of the tax rate later in the year, so we don't wanna leave ourselves short that way.
Thank you.
Marissa, you put the valuations at an increase of 2.5%.
2.5%.
And what have the valuations increased over the last couple of years?
How much?
Yeah, roughly, do you remember?
I think that last year was about 3% or so. I think that a couple of years ago, I think we had one year that it was about 5%.
Okay.
So it's been within that range. I think last year was just about 3% and I did talk to, the director of assessing, when estimating that number, and he thought that was a safe number,
Okay.
to go with.
Got it, thanks.
Again, it's difficult to predict, but,
Right,
right. It's a conservative number.
So this tries to show you a little bit about where your tax rate, your tax dollar rather goes. You'll see FY '20, we grew a little bit to the prior years in the general government, but this year it's back into the normal range. For the most part, again, most of the increase here is really in the regional school district. We have almost a full dollar increase in the per thousand, and that almost equates to what we're expecting to see in a tax rate increase if that whole budget gets approved and put forward by the school committee next week or 2 weeks. So we've been pretty consistent over the years. We're trying to maintain that conservative view and keep ourselves being respectful of the taxpayers' dollar. Yeah, this talks to what you just asked Marissa about with the assessed values trend. So we're seeing, we're projecting a little increase. The economy's still good, houses are still selling, but we don't want to get too excited about it and project too much, because if it doesn't come in that way, then we're hurt, and the tax rate will actually go up because values will be down. So And this is what we've been talking about since the beginning of the presentation tonight. Our excess levy capacity is under this budget as currently proposed with 12.5% increase for schools. All of our capacity would be gone. So, and then here's some historical information for you. Actually, I'm going to have Marissa walk you through the slide because this is one where I start having trouble being able to explain what I understand it to be. And I'd rather have the expert do it.
Thank you. So this slide just gives you some history on the tax rate and what it means as far as what your tax bill or medium tax bill is. This was actually a request, I can't remember if it was from the Board of Selectmen or the FinCom last year, to have this as a slide on the budget presentation. It just gives you history since FY16 of what the medium home value was and what the tax rate was and what the impact of that is on your tax bill. So as of right now, if we estimate, again, based on estimates, for FY21, if we estimate that the median home value will increase by 2.5%, that would be that will bring it to $543,763. At the estimated rate of $17.89 on your tax rate, that would pretty much mean that your taxes would increase by about $720
Per year.
So. That's pretty much all there is to that one.
So,
You
that's-
just didn't
that's
want
not-
to deliver the bad news.
I was the one that misquoted the tax rate, the estimated tax rate, and made it higher than it is, so, I mean, I already did my part scaring everybody.
Yeah, jeez.
So that's the high-level kind of view of where we're at. We've got the department heads here. Marissa and I are available to answer questions, talk about it. As I said, this is a budget proposal we're required to present to you, our recommendation for how to go into next year. It is unfortunately challenged by the fact that until the school department votes a budget, we have to go with their latest, the latest thing that they voted on, which is still at 12.5%. I did sense, like you, David, that the school committee may be considering something less than 12.5%. I would welcome that heartily. Whatever that number finally winds up being, will make it a little easier. But this is kind of where we're at today.
If they, from the standpoint of a bargaining mode, come down to 9 to 10%, I wouldn't view that as a victory for the taxpayer.
No, I wouldn't view it as a victory for the taxpayer, but I would view it as better than where we're at right now. I agree with you.
Which calls into question the methodology for presentation at town meeting. I'll leave it to you as to when you want to raise that topic.
We're all here tonight. I know that if you're alluding to the discussion that you and Jeff and I had with Wyndham, do you want to present that, or would you like me to present a little synopsis of what we've talked about?
Go right ahead.
So, for the benefit of the rest of the boards and committees and everybody at home, in understanding that the school department, has needs that we're having trouble trying to isolate and understand fully, and that they're going to be bringing forward a budget request that likely will be outside of our ability to fund it within the budget. There was a discussion between the chairs of the FinCom and Select Board from both towns, Hamilton and Wyndham, and myself. Unfortunately, Anthony Insaldi, the town administrator in Wyndham, had to be at a funeral that night. But we're trying to talk about having a similar approach to the way we propose the budget. In this case here, the idea would be to put forward a budget to town meeting for town and schools up to 5% in one question, and everything over 5% would be in a second question for the schools. The reasoning behind that is that the town's budget increase is very minuscule and is easily covered, even dwarfed by the 5% increase for the school side, and is easy to justify that. We can live within our means at that. Over 5%, we'd be in a second budget question, and if that were approved, the override amount would wind up on the ballot. That would still that number would still need to be determined based on what the final school budget request is. we can't ask for an override until we in fact hit the levy capacity. So we'd still be in that situation using up all of our levy capacity before we ask for an override. If they bring the number down from 12.5% to 9%, the override might be a very small amount, but they would still be using up all of our levy capacity.
So the thought was, if question number one, for us, it would be 2.5% budget increase, give or take. And we would be showing our good faith and support of the schools by giving them essentially 100% more in question one than we would be seeking. And then any excess above 5 would be dealt with in question two. Remember, we tried that in fiscal 17, I think it was, and there was a motion to consolidate.
Yep.
So we ought to anticipate that again. If we're going to pursue this, we ought to anticipate that gambit, educate the public as much as possible in advance of town meeting by social media, whatever that is, plus mail, and then be prepared for that tactic at town meeting.
Yeah. I fully agree. I think that if, once I have a vote from the boards that you've accepted our budget and we've, you've voted to agree on a path forward, we'll prepare the documentation to outline what the town's budget request equates to and what the different levels of school department requests would mean for the taxpayer.
I just wanted to add one other thought. The schools are presenting their budget under the rationale of this is an adjustment year based upon underfunding for fiscal 20, apparently. But that's the school committee's responsibility. And most of the underfunding, seems to me, was in base-type costs, which will be repetitive in 22 and 23 and 24, plus whatever other increases are forthcoming. So like the potential override to be repetitive, the school budget is going to continue in incremental measure well beyond what we're trying to do. It's time to try to establish some equal, I don't want to use the word playing field because that's another topic, but some equal pace for both town and school side. Sorry.
In addition, I mean, we're looking for leadership in the schools for new superintendents, so maybe this isn't the right year to do it. Maybe they need to wait till they have new leadership and new direction before they sort of ask for all this. I mean, something they, you know, all at once. Like, I agree with you, like, pace it and better, and under better leadership, maybe, permanent leadership.
I think I said it last week during the joint meeting with the school committee that, you know, from the town's perspective, the schools get a bottom line budget. So it's very nice of them to share with us the information of where they plan to spend the money that they get from us. But at the end of the day, we really don't have any say on that. We can only, as a community, vote to give them a sum of money that they can use based on education reform in any way they see fit. So
It's in good faith.
it's in good faith, and you know, we assume that they'd be, you know, using the money the way they tell us they're going to use the money. I'm not anticipating, you know, that any of that has been misrepresented, but at the end of the day, we can't be asked to sit there and make judgment calls on, you know, does this eliminate teachers or programs or anything like that, because we really don't know. That's up to the schools to determine. But it is up to the town to determine how much money you fund the schools at. So.
Pardon me, I just want to make two other points. I apologize. One is, in their presentation, they use such phrases as contractual obligations for including personnel costs. And of course, they become contractual obligations only after there's a voluntary agreement.
Right, after it's been negotiated.
After discretion is exercised. So those are really voluntary undertakings, about 70% of their budget for personnel, while our employees are not treated as well. And I think that's a shame, and that ought to be taken into consideration. Secondly, they did not mention their other post-employment benefit liability, OPEB, which is now well in excess of 30 million, and we own 60-some-odd% of that. So that, and then their capital budget in addition.
Right, I think last year, they had $1 million to go in the OPEB, and that got cut. And then I saw a line item this year for 250 that was kind of on a wish list.
Right, well, yeah, I
That's
think,
my- is that in their budget or not, OPEB?
Not right now.
No, not in it.
Oh,
I think that was their original, their preview budget from December, I think, had the $250,000 number that Sean referenced, and by the time they got together again in January, that had fallen out. It helped get them down to 12.5%, so 12.8%, so.
I mean, of all the things problems that I have with the school budget, that's the one that I think, it's my annual kind of stump speech at our joint meeting. I say, what about OPEB, the Jeff Sands or whoever at the time is there, and it's not getting any lower. It's
Right.
just getting higher every year, and it's very irresponsible to not address it in some way, kind of productively and with some type of a cadence and a plan for it. And I don't think they've even talked about that. I mean, it seemed with Jeff there last year, when I approached him about it last year, I think he said, we're just gonna put $1 million in every year until it's full. And I thought, you can't add $32 million to a school budget over 30 years and not have anything else happen in the school. So I don't know what their plan is, and I don't know if they know what their plan is, which is disappointing.
Yeah.
But on the town side, we're doing
we are,
quite well with it,
yes,
so.
we're on pace.
Was there any shift in the percentage between Wyndham and Hamilton this year, or is it the same?
No, it's still pretty much the same. The shift is still on Wyndham's side of the ledger. It was ironic when we were looking at trends. Evidently, recently the school enrollment trend had been going down. This was the year they were predicting it was going to flatten out or go up. It actually did flatten out. I believe it was the same number on after October 1st as it was last year, but more of those students were in Wyndham than they had predicted. So the shift stayed on the Wyndham side this year. But it's not something that's going to stay forever. We know it's cyclical. As homes in this community start to sell, folks, empty nesters decide to sell and retire out of state, or they downsize, whatever the case may be, the homes in this community will go on the market, they'll sell to young families who want to get into the school system, and those folks will start coming back here, so.
From what I remember in that meeting, Wyndham felt like they would like to do something similar.
Yes, in fact, they asked us to, pencil in a follow-up meeting for the end of February after the school department's voted on its budget, so that we can kind of finalize a kind of a way forward that would be on the same path. So the numbers might be different. No matter what happens, Wyndham's going to need an override of some kind, even to support Townside. So they need to do that anyway. But they were very interested in the idea of having a budget question that looked at kind of equal treatment, or a little bit fairer, quote unquote, a little bit more for the schools, and then a second question that just dealt with those things that were just way and above and outside what the town itself was asking for. So.
All right.
So Joe, on the free cash.
Yep.
So we're trying to meet our financial goals pretty quickly. We're trying to get free cash down to 5%, but then also fund some of the.
So the stabilization funds up to.
Right, so is any point in slowing that down and sort of taking money
So
from?
we took a little bit of a slowdown this year. The Marissa will correct me if I'm wrong, but the recommendation for transfer into the stabilization fund is what was came out of the formula in the financial policies. Instead of last year, we put more.
What
It
did we
was
lump in last year?
that plus a percentage, and we kept on the same track for the new capital stabilization fund. So
Is there another option to put less away now and to not raise our taxes?
As your town manager, with my finance director, looking at our overall fiscal health going forward, no, I wouldn't recommend it. The idea is to, kind of keep us on a track that gets us to protect our future while we're investing in what we need to right now. And we have free cash this year. I can't be guaranteed that we'll have it next year. In years when we have free cash, we should dedicate a certain percentage to stabilization and capital stabilization funds. That's what we're doing. That's what our policy that the town adopted last year says we should do. That's what we're doing. If we go away from that, then there wasn't really any sense in adopting a stabilization policy. If you get to next year and you only have $1 million of free cash instead of $3 million like we had this year, That's very possible in a bad year when the economy turns down. You'll be putting less away, but you should still stay to that percentage. You should still kind of keep your eyes on the larger prize. It'd be like you saying, I'm going to take some money out of my 401k so I can put an in-ground pool in. Doesn't make any sense.
May I just keep in mind, just if I understood your comment.
I just want, this question has to be asked, so I want you guys to have the opportunity to
Yes.
answer it. So
So if I-
people tell us money moving from one account to another account.
If
I just wanted you guys to have the opportunity to describe why we're doing it, so.
Yeah, please correct me if I misunderstood your question, but putting money aside to the capital stabilization and the stabilization fund right now has no effect in the tax rate because we're not using any taxation dollars to move those funds to a capital and a stabilization fund. We're using free cash money. So whether it's in free cash or it's in a capital or stabilization fund, it would only affect your tax rate if we actually were using taxation dollars to make these transfers into the stabilization funds. And that's not what we're doing. All we're doing is moving from one bucket to the other, so from free cash to this. The only way that could affect your tax rate, which I'll say I don't necessarily recommend, it would be that if you said, well, instead of using free cash to move the funds from free cash to stabilization into to the regular stabilization fund, we're going to use free cash to actually fund operating items, which is not necessarily what the free cash is supposed to be used for.
So page one out of the other, on the other is your sort of summary. Basically, what you're saying is everything in here is a one-time hit. It's a
Correct.
one-time cost.
Correct,
Right,
and we which in the past we don't usually do this, but we're actually, because of being such a difficult budget year, we are recommending all of the capital items to be funded through free cash,
Right.
which in the past has never been the case. But because we know it is a tough budget year, we say, okay, if we actually use free cash to fund our capital stabilization and our regular stabilization fund and all of our capital asks,
Right.
just that alone will help your tax rate. Because otherwise, if the capital items were not being funded through free cash, they would be on taxation.
Levy.
Thank you. No, it's good. And I think people need to hear that
Yeah,
explained. 'Cause
absolutely.
it's some people see those
I
big
think
numbers.
They
Yeah.
see that amount and think it's gonna
Yeah,
be taxed.
right,
It's coming out of the general fund, but it's coming out of,
Yeah.
it's a transfer of balances, basically.
It really has no effect.
Earmarking
It does when we're using the free cash to balance capital items, but the actual stabilization and capital stabilization really doesn't affect your tax
Marissa,
rate. Yes.
would you explain the difference from your expert view between free cash, stabilization fund, and the capital? Of course, the capital fund
Capital.
by name is for capital projects, but we're not using that for these one-time purchases. We're using the free cash.
Not yet.
You're proposing to use the free cash.
Mhm.
So would you just explain the difference between those three?
Absolutely. So by actually moving free cash to our capital stabilization, our stabilization fund, it's more restrictive. Free cash, so when you need a 2/3 vote in order to take money out of a stabilization fund. You cannot use any funds that are in a stabilization fund unless you go to town meeting, which gives the voters more power to whether vote yes or no when it comes to these type of projects. On a free cash vote, you don't actually need a 2/3 vote. What the intent is when we created a capital stabilization fund was to actually start a savings fund, let's call it a savings fund, because we know we have a 5-year capital plan that is in the millions of dollars. So the idea was, let's create a capital stabilization fund, start to accumulate some funds there, so then when we have a big capital ask, we can actually use some of those dollars instead of, asking for taxation or all of it coming from taxation. We haven't reached our goal yet, so it wouldn't necessarily make sense to start taking money out of that fund if we haven't even reached the goal that we wanted. The goal, or what was adopted by the board, was that we would have at least the total of 1 year depreciation from the financial statements, which I believe for FY19 was $1.2 million. We're not there yet. What I would expect to happen is when we actually reach that number, and in future years we get these big capital asks, then we can say, well, we do have $1.2 million in our capital stabilization. Why don't we use 200 this year from the capital stabilization to not have this big hit on our taxation? So at this point, if we haven't reached that goal, does it make sense to we just put money for the first time in last year to start taking out of it? I wouldn't.
Thank you.
Yes.
Our policies provide for free cash, my memory is aged memory, 5 to 10%. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So
We're at
If this were adopted, we're 4.9.
we're at 4.9. So
At a prudent
we are at a.
size.
I mean, I don't think we're way off. 5.9% versus 5% in hopes that this year we can generate some free cash and be up to the 5% again. That's the idea. We can't predict whether that's going to happen or not, but I think we can probably, based on, we did have some openings during the year, so I think we probably will have some, we'll generate some free cash that will bring us up to the 5% again.
But 5% is the minimum under our policy.
It says at a minimum it should be 5%, but when the auditors look at it from an audit perspective, they tend to combine a stabilization fund and free cash. So they do want you to have 10% on both. In the past, what has happened is we have never been even close to 5% on our stabilization fund. We were way below on our stabilization fund, and we were higher on our free cash. So that's when we actually decided, let's start, putting it in the right buckets. If we want to have free cash at 5% and then bring our stabilization fund up to 5%, which I don't remember off the top of my head, but even with the transfer for this particular year, we would still not be at a 5% in our stabilization fund.
We would essentially be compliant with our policies.
If you had 4% stabilization and 4.9% in free cash, it'd be
8.9%.
combined, so almost at 10%.
We wouldn't be quite there, but we're pretty close. We're trying to
Better than we were
do,
last year.
Yes.
well, we're trying to do the best that we can and trying to not have, I think the use of free cash is to alleviate some of what the tax impact would be if all of the capital items of $500,000 were to be on your tax levy as well.
And just, since we're talking about the capital items, the $500,000 of capital, 725 or 35, when you consider the two items that have been added into leases, only represents a portion of what was originally on this year's capital plan. The 5-year capital plan had a total ask of about $30 million over 5 years, and 2.5 plus of that was for this year. Thank you to the good work of the capital committee to help us kind of prioritize those things, give them a kind of a number. We are recommending, given the tight budgeting that we're into this year, only kind of funding the ones that were deemed the highest priority. But that means that other $2 million of requests are going to get booted down over the next 4 years and spread out. So that capital process is annually evolving. So we will take the $2 million that didn't get funded this year, put it onto the plan, reprioritize. Other things may come on. Hopefully, we'll have a couple things that we determine we can live without, but other things will come on. That capital plan will be updated every year, so the 5 years is always going.
And if you want to see what those items are, I'm dying to go over this book. I know you all are.
This is like exciting time.
It is.
This
You
is
know.
This is what she lives for.
But under your capital budget tab, there's what's included in actually this budget. But after that summary, there is the 5-year capital plan, and you'll be able to see all of what the asks were for FY21 and what did not get put through or put forward on the budget. Would you think it would be helpful to give you a quick overview of what's in the book, or no? I know a lot of you have seen it.
Yes.
Okay.
Versus dying to talk, so I'm going to get out of order.
Sorry. So to give you a quick overview of what's in the book, there is a lot of information there, and I try to give you as much as I can so that it's very transparent and you actually can see it at high level and you can see as much detail as you would like to. The first tab where it has the estimated tax rate, it's actually a high-level summary by function, general government, public safety, education, public works, of what our expenditures are. And then the second page actually represents what our revenues are and what our estimated tax rate is based on those assumptions. Keep in mind, as I've mentioned in the past, the property valuations have an estimated increase of 2.5%. Then on the second tab, you have the general fund revenues. All this is really local receipts. So our license and permits, motor vehicle, interest, any departmental revenues that we take in, any pilot payments, they're all listed under this section. Again, I gave you a high-level total summary, and then on the second, you have a divider, and then you have the detail of all the different accounts that make up those totals. So if you want to go and if you want to see line by line what we bring in on an annual basis, you can see that. Then you have the general fund expenditures. The first schedule is actually our compensation table. You're used to seeing this because we always have this as an appendix for our annual town meeting. So you can see all the exempt and hourly employee, what their hourly rate is, what their salaries are by position. And it also lists their union contracts. We do have 2 union contracts that are that will be under negotiations as of 6/30/2020. Okay. Then you have, again, you might, this might look familiar to you. This is, again, normally Appendix B for our annual town meeting, that it's, again, high level. It shows general government, selectmen, personnel expenses, operating expenses, what the total is. And this is usually the Appendix B that goes to annual town meeting. Because I know you like to look at all the detail, and then gave you all of the individual accounts that make up those balances. And because that wasn't enough, I also gave you munis reports. And the munis reports actually give you line by line what's included in each line item. It has descriptions of what's included in each account. It has the descriptions that actually came from the department heads when they enter their budgets in. They actually list out what they're going to be using these funds for. And you have those in these types of reports that are munis reports. You have explanations of what's under each line item.
So I got a question for you. That second,
Yes.
the second one, you have the 2021 requested budget, and you have a line next to it says adjustments.
That's
What's
correct.
the difference between those two?
So what I normally like to present is, this is what was requested from the department heads. Since then, these were the adjustments that happened. So we normally have the requested balance that gets entered into our munis. And then we have our budget meetings with the finance, with myself, town manager, and the FinCom liaison. So if there were any reductions or additions, then they will be listed under the adjustments. Also, the big one that you're going to see that line item went up $1.7 million is because my original estimate for the school budget was 5%, and then I had to change it to the 12.66%, so that's really what the big change is there. Also, since the time that we actually start putting the budget together to today, I start with estimates based on information that I have as of, that particular day, October, November. But then I start getting information from the different vendors, from the different departments. Like, for example, our joint agreements with the town of Wyndham, I just recently got final numbers on what their budgets are. So I just keep track of all those changes. So if someone wanted to see what the original requested budget was, or the original estimates were, and then any changes from
So the other one was the OPEB no, sorry, OFU transfer of enterprise, is that just, that's just the fund, right?
It's actually not the OPEB, that's actually our
Oh,
capital,
sorry.
it's our, you are correct, it is a transfer, it's for our capital stabilization and our stabilization
Okay,
fund.
that one, okay.
I didn't have any original estimates on the requested budget because those numbers are based on percentages of our total budget.
see, that's right.
So until I have a total original, I can't calculate those.
Gotcha.
So that's why those were included as part of the adjustments.
And when do we find out if we generated any free cash in 2019? When do you determine that?
It's usually after July 15th, anytime after July 15th. We usually have our last warrant July 15th, and then we close the books usually 2-3 weeks after the fact.
Thank you, that makes sense.
So Marissa, if I'm looking at this correctly, the 1.7 million of adjustments, if you net out the school portion as well as that transfer, the 645,000.
We went down quite a bit.
The town budget would have gone down by 350,000 or so.
Yes, the FinCom was really tough on department heads. I'm just kidding. We try to, budget within our means, and there were quite a few reductions in departmental budgets this year.
No, but I mean, I think it's
Yeah.
a credit to all the departments
Yeah.
that they really sharpened the pencils and
Yeah.
worked on this thing.
I agree, they're here tonight, which I appreciate, I
Yeah.
think you guys did a
No,
great job of,
absolutely.
so thank you for
Yeah.
coming, and, I mean, a lot of questions, because you guys did a great job of sort of
And
meeting
keep
our
in
goals.
mind that some items are things that you might need one particular fiscal year, but not in another fiscal year. I know that the finance budget, if you look, I'm not trying to be a hero, but it went down $40,000. But the reason being that the town only needs to have an actuarial evaluation every 2 years. I need one in FY20. I don't need one in FY21. So I obviously took that out of the budget. We had an upgrade that we need to do to our assessor software. That was a $20,000 item that was included in FY20. Well, once that upgrade is done, I don't need another $20,000 in FY21. So we do try very carefully to go through, all of us, to go through our budget and see, well, we might have certain needs in one particular fiscal year, but not in the next. So,
Marissa,
Yes.
is there a year-to-year personnel count here?
I don't think that I have that in there, no.
Is
How
that-
many
That-
positions are open right now, currently?
We have, currently I'm meeting actually with Manchester. Open positions, I think that we have an open position, open part-time position in the Council on Aging. They did interviews a week or so ago, and they're waiting to hear from their candidate. Excuse me, we offered the position for community development, for community projects manager to a candidate today, and she accepted. So she starts on February 12th. And we're waiting, I'm meeting with the town administrator, town managers of Rockport and Manchester on Thursday to start going through resumes for the open regional HR director. So other than that, I think do we have any other open positions? Tim just filled two workers in the DPW department. Those were filled within the last month or so. And other than that, we don't have
How
anything.
about the conservation agent, is that?
Conservation agent starts tomorrow.
Okay, super.
Bert Cummins starts.
We're not at any risk really for the forecast of positions that aren't.
No, we're not recommending, other than a firefighter that we talked about earlier, we're not recommending any new positions in this budget, so.
Getting back to my question, Marissa, can you get for us a history, going back the same years that are here, of personnel?
We did something like that right before the meeting, so we'll just have to pull it together and put it onto a page for you.
That would be helpful, I think, since personnel costs are what % of our budget?
I want to say it's around 60%, but I
Yes,
have
it's
to.
like similar to the school.
Yeah. So, there are no new positions, with the exception of fire, for fiscal '21, correct?
Right.
There was a new position in the police department.
That we pulled back.
That was a request, but for fiscal '20, current year,
Right.
there was an additional hire
Right.
in anticipation of the
Yes, sir. Right.
pot income, which
Right.
was not forthcoming.
Right.
So I have an interest in knowing whether that hire has reduced overtime.
Understand.
And also the same question for fire. So can you point us to the overtime in here and,
I think in some of the munis, I think there's some notes on it in here.
There are some notes. That's not an answer that I can give you at the time because FY20 hasn't ended yet, so I don't know how that overtime number is going to look in comparison to the prior year. And FY20 is the first year that we had that new hire.
but for '21, that savings should be manifested, should be clear, shouldn't it? For the ask for '21?
Well, that position,
That is, that hire remains employed.
Yes.
So one would think the
Right.
rationale for overtime reduction, that was used in part to explain the hire this year, that rationale would carry over to next year in terms of reducing overtime.
I would agree with you, but we don't have that information. Historically, we're budgeting, we actually did reduce the overtime budgeted hours. So I can say that, yes, we did do that. Right now, I don't know what the total hours of overtime are going to be in FY20 with that new position to have a clear understanding of what that new number is going to be. We did estimate a reduction, so that was done.
So can we just go to that here?
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
You're not going to see that. You're going to see an increase because of the new contract. So I can tell you, I can give the information of what the number of hours that were reduced, if that would answer your question. You won't see a reduction in that line item in this material because due to the new collective bargaining agreements, you know, the rates went up, so you're not going to see a reduction here. It would have been more than what it's being represented right now.
So, I mean, the rates went up by 2%, give or take.
2.25%, I believe.
So, understanding that inflation, I would just like to see some indication that the rationale for the new hire, in fact,
Saved a certain number of hours in
Yeah.
overtime, yeah.
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 We can get you that, we can get you that. We don't have.
And I actually don't think we're going to see that until the summertime because that officer, as of right now, is working at the school. It's not going to be until the summertime that officer will be filling in for vacation, and that's when we're going to see the overtime savings,
And the,
which is going to be
Actuals until September, basically. when the school
exactly,
starts up.
exactly. And I know that the chief just came in. I don't know. I can't remember off the top of my head what the reduction in hours were. Do you remember? I know we did reduce the number of overtime hours.
I don't recall not having it in front of me.
Okay.
I'd be guessing.
Yeah.
But we, as Merce said, we're anticipating that most of that savings in hours to come in the summertime when the officer that's in the schools now wouldn't be in the, and the officer that backfilled that position when he went into the schools in September didn't start until October? October, so,
There's a little bit of a
there's a
gap
little
there,
bit of a
too.
gap in there where we were actually using overtime in September and October to fill the street hours because the SRO was in schools.
But it did go down, went down like $1,750, but in this budget, but that's what we show in that 15,210 line item. But yeah, it's hard, you have to adjust in the 2.5%.
I couldn't quite figure it out from.
Yeah, it's quite,
the
right.
figures. So if you would just keep in mind, please, when the figures become available.
Yes.
To supply the boards with those,
Yes.
both for fire and police, please.
Absolutely, we will.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay.
Yeah, I had a
Um,
question.
Oh, yes.
I had a question, Joe, you had, $67,000 increase in cost for joint programs?
That's what we've been, that was the estimate given to us by primarily Wyndham. There were no increases in the cost for the ACO. Most of our joint programs currently are with the town of Wyndham, and that was based on the programs that, like the library, that are joint programs but are managed from Wyndham Inspectional Services. That was based on the increases that they gave to us in the budget process. So we'll be having the joint FinCom meeting sometime soon. We actually have to set the date for that. And we'll be going over those increases shortly. But that was primarily in the library and the inspection services departments saw increases.
Library's up a bit, and inspection services, in brand new, too, it's all in.
Inspectional services is up about $24,000.
Those costs, the proportion of responsibility for those costs are by a contract?
Yes, there's a intermunicipal agreement between the two that sets the percentage we pay based on the number of hours we get, and the formula, I think, also includes size of population, number of inspection services, for instance, the number of households that would need to be served, et cetera. So we pay about 2/3 of the cost in both ways, a little bit off of that, but about 2/3 of the cost. And when the costs of the overall program go up, then we get 2/3 of that increase. So.
I recall during our budget sessions, there was some discussion or wonderment as to the library increase. Have you been able to dialogue with Wyndham, Marissa, about that?
I have had some conversations. This was just their preliminary budget. We haven't had our joint programs meeting. As you know, every year we have a joint meeting with the FinComs to go over the joint programs.
It seemed a bit high at the time.
Yeah, I think that it's a challenge this year because of the minimum wage going up. So that's what the issues that they were having.
If you look
Oh,
back
we did.
historically on their
Other things,
budget,
other
it's
expenses.
gone up quite a bit since 2017. It's
Yeah.
about 50 or so a year, it seems, if I'm remembering correctly. I can't find it right now, but I'd highlighted it because I thought it's increased quite a bit in the last 5 years.
And I know that last year we did have a couple of retirement payouts that were included in that budget that were removed for FY '21. But my understanding is that most of the increases relate to the minimum wage increase. And I have asked a couple of questions on the draft assessment, and then we will have our joint meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, the next tab is just the school budget. I just added their presentation to the book, so you would have everything in one place. The next one being the capital budget, which is the slide that was up on the screen. And then, like I said, the second piece is the actual 5-year capital improvement plan that was put together, including items that were not funded or were not included in the FY '21 budget.
Is that this, I'm looking under capital budget.
Yes.
I see town capital improvements for fiscal year 2021, and then water enterprise. Maybe I'm missing.
Behind the blue,
Am I on the wrong
Right.
page, or did I insert it?
behind the blue sheet.
Yeah, behind the blue sheet, you should have
Yeah,
this.
There it is, okay.
Yeah. Okay. The next tab, we have the water enterprise summary. So, again, it's just a summary of what we're estimating for our revenues, and our expenditures for the water enterprise fund. And we're estimating, as of right now, that we will need to use $307,000 of retained earnings to balance that budget.
Can you explain a little bit what that means?
It's pretty much free cash in the water enterprise fund. So right now, with our estimates for revenues, our expenditures were higher than what we're estimating that we're going to be taking in for revenues. So in order to balance that budget, we actually have to use what we can call, it's called retained earnings, but we could call free cash from the water enterprise fund.
And is that something that is kept at a certain level?
It's supposed to be at a minimum 20%. We are over that 20%. It is recommended that to be more than 20% if we do have a lot of capital projects out there, which we've had quite a few in the past few years. You probably recall that I think we have at least $15 million bonded in water capital projects, and I know that that's not the end of it. So, I mean, I would say that we could probably use that amount for FY '21, but we should not get into a habit, or we will not be able to continue to balance the budget with retained earnings in future years.
That's part of the reason we're recommending the Board of Selectmen consider a rate change or a change in the structure of the way we bill, so.
This is the OPEB appropriation in here,
Yes, it's $125,000,
The
yes.
same.
and that's actuarially.
Well,
sound.
we're gonna have a new actuarial report done in FY '20, so we'll see what that will be coming in at.
Thank you.
Yes.
In the education section, can you just explain what the other things are besides the school district? There's about 8 other things in there. Here I'm-
It's debt payments, so,
So those continue for a while?
yes, I believe it, if I'm not mistaken, at our Wednesday meeting, I think it was said that they don't have any debt payments coming off the books until 2023?
I think you're right, yeah.
Yes.
There's another 500,000 in education liability besides the school district.
Yeah, we do have an assessment with the Essex North Shore. Is that the one you're
Yeah, just a
referring
bunch of
to?
them there. I just wanted you to explain what they were. So can you just run down those ones?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one, it's the assessment with the regional high school. Then the second one is the Essex North Shore Agricultural Technical School District. We do pay them an assessment as well. I have not gotten their budget for FY '21, so right now it's just being estimated. And then the next one is the Essex North Shore debt payment, which is about $19,000 that they have in debt service. And then the next items, which were about 5 or 6, are actually debt service payments at the Hamilton Wyndham Regional High School District. So one of them is actually brand new. The fire suppression at the Winthrop, that's actually a new one that would just happen, I want to say, last year. And they also had the debt at the Bucher and Winthrop for the boiler, and they're estimating that they will be issuing bans, which is short-term debt, and they're estimating that the interest on that would be about $9,500. So it's just a breakdown between the assessment and the actual debt payments that they have.
Melissa, you said that there's a regional agricultural school
Yes.
and a regional high school? What was the first one?
Hamilton, Wyndham, and then,
Oh,
yes. Going back to the water enterprise summary, you have the water enterprise summary. Again, I gave you detailed reports from Unused that shows all the revenues that were estimated for the water and then their expenditures. And also in there you have the indirect costs. I always get a lot of questions on these, so I wanted to make sure you had those available to you. And what that means is this is actually a transfer that comes back to the general fund, and it's mostly to reimburse the general fund for costs for health insurance, because all health insurance costs, all retirement costs, they're all paid out of the general fund, including water employees. So this is a way of reimbursement to the general fund for those costs that are being paid in that fund. It also includes indirect costs for certain departments, so treasurer's office, town managers, finance, because we do all the accounting, we do all the collections in the treasurer's office. There's a small portion that relates to that. And it also has a cost related to the DPW director's health insurance and a portion of his salary because he does serve both purposes, water and DPW. So the calculations can also be found on that tab. Sorry. The next one is a summary on the Patton Homestead operating summary. So again, we have summary version, what our estimates are for our revenues and what the estimates are for our expenditures, and what we're projecting to be our year-end fund balance. One thing that I'd like to point out in that is that the transfer from the general fund that is being presented is $118,000, but there is a possibility that about $44,000 would be coming back to the general fund for indirect costs. So once again, health insurance costs, retirement costs, we're showing all of those costs, we're paying for those costs in the general fund, and then we're reimbursing the general fund from the Patent Homestead Fund.
The net of the request is roughly $70,000.
Yeah,
Right. And we've done this last year.
correct.
Similar
Correct.
fashion.
If I may, I don't know that this is the proper time to raise this, and I understand there are a lot of emotions attached to the patent subject matter. It's a matter of emotional attachment for many residents. We want to be absolutely fair to Kaylee in this discussion. So I want to gently raise the topic for our deliberation as to the continued investment in the general fund from the tax base. I think, Kaylee, we had a 3-year timetable to determine if the word is correct, profitability, or self-sustaining. From the experience to date, that doesn't seem like it's going to come about. And without further investment. So I think the town has to come to grips with this at some point.
I agree. I'd say that, obviously, the Patent Homestead is an enterprise fund that we have. It's under our responsibility to propose a budget for it. As you alluded to, we asked the town to create a budget plan or business plan and to hire a director. We did those things. We had a rough time of it in the first year of the budget business plan, and you're right now it's not tracking well. We admit that. We understand that we spent a lot of the first 6 or 7 months learning what we didn't know that we didn't know. And we're kind of at that point now. We've pivoted in the way we're trying to project what we want to do there for the remainder of this fiscal year and for next year. We also recognize that we, can't rely on the town's goodwill forever. And Kaylee and I have had frank discussions about using this next year to not only work the business plan and try to make the property self-sustaining, but analyze and be able to recommend what an option B is or how to get out of the business of managing the homestead if it's not possible to make it work. The idea would be that even if you chose not to push the Patent Homestead budget forward, a town meeting voted against it, we still own the property, we still own the insurance, utility costs and things out there. We still have people housed out there now with the Wyndham Museum and the Hamilton Historical Society. All those things will require some time for us to determine how to handle those things. So I'm asking that you consider having the budget for 1 more year while we determine the best way to handle all those things. I'm hoping that some of the recent changes that Kaylee has made and some of the things that we learned in the last 6 months are going to help us pivot more towards self-sustaining. But if not, we'll at least have time to have other discussions with folks to figure out what the future of the homestead would be if we don't continue to own it. So that's my...
Isn't it a bit of a circular problem, Joe, in that sustainability, i.e. income, may be related directly or otherwise to improvements that need to be made? And where does the funding come for those improvements?
Well, I've always said since I, took on the job here that I would never saw us making huge capital investment in the homestead from the town's general fund, and we still don't see that. Our goal is to create enough interest in it that we can attract the funds from other sources. And if we can't do that, we'll be honest with you. But I do think, we hired Kaylee not even just a year ago. I think this week. She started a year ago today, or this week coming up. So We haven't really had a full year of trying to work a business plan out there. I understand, I am well aware of the fact that town's owned the property since 2012. There've been a lot of years of nothing really going on out there, and I get that. And I get that that's frustrating for some folks. I also get, as you mentioned earlier, that there are some folks that are very emotionally attached to the Patton name and the Patton family. I'm asking for a little more time to help us figure out how to make the best recommendation to you. I wouldn't project that I would be here next year asking for the same thing. If we get to this point next year and the property's not moving, then we know we'll be here asking you to consider ways to divest. But I think at this point, we're not there yet.
Thank you.
And I would hope that the Patton Homestead Committee or Board, PHI, will be starting a capital campaign yesterday.
It's not gonna happen.
So,
We've discussed
We don't
that
have
with
time
the
for that.
capital, with the patent board, and where they've had interest, they've also had pushback because it's not an owned property.
it's a municipal
sold
property,
out
right?
from under them, and therefore they're investing in something that may not be there in the future. So or donating, actually. One of the things that we had discussed was also looking at gifting the property to somebody else that could keep it in perpetuity. And an example would be the Trust for Reservations is an example of somebody who could do that. And if that is if that's one of the possibilities, then I think that should be, it'll take a year to really get that. So I was.
And that's what I want to use some of this year to try and discern, so.
But I'm saying that if that conversation should be had now.
Yes. Yeah, I
From where that to.
I agree.
But I think that might be an opportunity where it's stable. People might invest in it from a military standpoint, from a, just a cultural standpoint. And then you have the ability for it to become self-sustaining and perhaps even providing revenue.
What's roughly the $100,000 effect on the tax rate?
7 cents per thousand.
6.5 cents.
Okay.
And again, like,
So you have cents,
150, it's
115,000
115,000 requests, but we're
6 to 7
sending
cents per
$45,000
No, no,
back to the
yeah,
general fund.
1,000.
So it's really $70,000 net cost to the town.
The countervailing argument to what Nick is suggesting, and I'm not making value judgments, but there's a countervailing argument in terms of the town welfare, and that is under the agreement by which we presently own, we're entitled, I don't have the exact language, but I think generally we're entitled to sell it and retain half of the proceeds. So that's sort of the countervailing consideration to gifting the property to a nonprofit. I just wanted to put that out there. I'm not making a value judgment at this
Right.
point.
No, I think it's important that, maybe it's in parallel, Joe, to like you suggested, but we take a look at what this asset would look like. After all, it's an asset to the town. What would it look like under different scenarios, like selling it, David, to your point? How much, what do we think the value is? What would that dollar amount mean to the town? How could that money be used in perpetuity to reflect the gift that was made? I think it's incredibly important to have that discussion. I don't know when that begins, if it's
Soon.
now's the time, or we want to give it another year. I mean, it's,
As I said,
We can.
Another year,
I don't think we
that
can.
has to be part of the calculation now
Yeah.
for that year,
I'm-
so that at the end of the year, with all
We'll be
these
ready.
options
Right.
are on the table, fully fleshed out.
Smart.
I had one question as well. I understand we can't spend any more on the house itself without starting to trigger certain.
Yeah, we spent some money out of a capital fund that had been established for the house to improve some things and make the building a little bit more weather secure, a little bit more sustainable, or protected. And we've reached a point where it's getting to the break-even point where if you spend any more within a certain number of years, you've improved the home beyond 30% of its value. Therefore, you'd have to upgrade it as a public building for for
ADA.
ADA.
Yep.
Thank you.
And does that restrict us doing any more money on, say, landscaping or the barn or?
No, in fact,
just
with the
building
barn
itself?
too, another good thing is that, Kaylee, why don't you come up and share the news about the Aggie, Aggie Tech School?
Yeah, so we are working with Essex North Shore Aggie Tech to do some electrical upgrades to the carriage bay of the stables where we've had some of the events this past year. The D-Day speakers were there. I can't think of the utility company. National Grid rented the space for their community conversations in there. So we're upgrading the electrical work there so that we will have all of the wires that are currently on the wall from the past 100 years taken off, and they'll be all nicely tucked underneath a box covering, and we'll get a new paint job. They're going to add new lighting to the space so that we don't just have string lights and lamps plugged into walls. We'll actually have real lighting coming down from the ceiling, and this is going to happen with the students from the tech school. So we're working with them to get this done. The plan at this point is that it will be finished by the end of the school year, not assuming that we don't have any other problems once they actually start working, but they should be finished by the end of May, beginning of June. We should be getting started sometime this month with the teachers this year.
So that helps us overcome one of the problems that we had with that particular part of the property, which is the barn has attracted a lot more interest in being utilized for events, but it was kind of substandard in electrical and made it kind of risky to rent it out. So we're hopeful that will help it be more retailable. And if it isn't, it makes it more valuable if we wind up gifting it or selling it or whatever the ultimate end goal is.
Yeah, and I've also had conversations with different volunteer groups about coming in and doing some of the landscaping, heavy lifting, and some of the paint jobs, both within the house and within the stables. I've talked to Home Base. It's a nonprofit based in Boston that helps vets transition into civilian life, and they oftentimes are looking for hands-on projects. So they said that they can bring a crew of people that will come and do some heavy work for us. I've talked to some of the local service clubs in the area, as well as the American Legion has volunteered or has offered volunteers for projects too. So we should have enough bodies starting this spring to get some of these heavier projects done to make the property itself look a lot more attractive to potential renters. The other piece is that PHI has been working with a marketing professional who's offering pro bono time to create a marketing plan for the homestead, and we should, by the beginning of April, by town meeting, have both the plan in place and the first step of reaching out to some of the professionals in the area that might be interested in renting the space, both businesses that might be using it for meetings or company retreats, but also special event professionals like people in the wedding industry who would be able to recommend the space to their clients.
Other work behind the scenes that Kaylee's done in the last several months has been to kind of create forms that make it easier to rent. When we first, I think probably 6 months ago, right after she got here, she had met with a couple of people that were interested in renting the place for a wedding. And then it became the process by which we could put them under contract. It became so cumbersome that they went and found someplace else. So she's kind of streamlined that process. We've developed documents that list what they need if they want to rent the property, and a rentable document. The only for rent document we had was if people wanted to pay to use Patton Park for something. Well, that's a park, and this is buildings, and so she created a better template for a rental document that we can utilize, and that puts hard information in people's hands when they do seek out the use, so makes it a little easier. Again, all things that we didn't know we needed when we started this a year ago. So.
Yeah.
Kaylee, the use does seem like it's down based on what was budgeted. What do you attribute, what's the pushback in terms of rentals? What is it, because we don't have bathrooms or we don't have?
It's been a little bit of the bathroom, but I think the biggest piece so far has been that the requirements that the town has for private insurance. We got a lot of pushback from people that we required a certificate of insurance that held the town to a standard that's higher than the standard that's everywhere else. the town requires 1 million, 3 million, and everywhere else seems to require 1 million, 2 million. And a lot of individuals or small groups that were coming to rent, they didn't necessarily have their own organizational insurance, like say the Wyndham Museum that is renting space for the archives already has organizational insurance. They just had to send over the certificate. They were fine. But when an individual comes to us and says, I want to hold grandma's birthday party here, oh, I have to go get a certificate of insurance. They go talk to their agent. They find out that's an additional $200. And they go, that's fine.
On top of the rental fee.
That's fine. We'll go somewhere else.
Right. Depends on the grandma, I suppose.
So that's been the biggest issue that we've come up against. And I've been working with folks from the both the finance department and the insurance company that the town uses to figure out what are the details in this and how do we make this usable for people. I've also reached out to insurance agents from Hamilton, Topsfield, Ipswich, Wenham, Beverly, all around to say, here's the town's requirements. Could you give me a quote on what this would be so that I can, when people come to me and say, I don't even know where to go to get this, I can say, here are other people in the area, here are agents in the area that have said that they will meet the town's requirements. Here's a list of them. They can help you to make that process easier for people.
That's a huge roadblock, folks.
And that's one of the pieces that I don't think anybody realized until
Right.
we really started getting into it.
Right, right. Part of the difficulty of a municipality trying to run an operation like this.
Yep. So,
Rubber meets
we recognize it's a kind of a make or break year, but we own the property, we have some of the foundation in place now, and we've learned a lot, so we're asking, I've got to take some time this year to figure out what the future of the homestead is, and if at that same time, Kaylee can continue to work the business plan, changed as it has been, and focus on some things that bring in revenue, we may surprise ourselves, or we'll have a frank discussion later this year about, the direction we're going to be heading in.
And as Joe said, we've already been at least laying the groundwork of what it looks like if the business plan is Plan A. If Plan A doesn't work, what is Plan B or C? Kind of
Started to have some preliminary conversations. with folks.
putting the feelers out.
Good.
Thank you, Kaylee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, Kaylee. Thanks. Anything else?
I have a question or two for Ray, if I may. Ray, we're hiring an additional firefighter.
Come on up, Ray.
Would this person be EMT trained?
Yes, it'd be all the qualifications that we presently have in place for a full-time firefighter, EMT trained, firefighter 1, 2.
So we see the sign out in front seeking interest in becoming a call firefighter. So I gather there's a downward trend.
Yes, there's a downward trend with call firefighters that's been happening over the years, and that's one of the reasons why I'm asking for the additional full-time firefighters, because during the day, we just don't have people coming back anymore. There is no one around in a consistent level to operate under safe conditions.
But just quickly relate so that people will understand that phrase, safe conditions, with an undermanned.
Yeah,
matter.
basically NFPA requires 4-person engine company, and with the fallback of 3 being the minimum. 2 days a week we're operating with just 3 people on the engine, and 3 days a week we're only operating 2, which is substandard, well below what NFPA requires. I think it's 1710. And now, as of last year, we are now underneath the microscope of OSHA, and they follow the NFPA regulations. So in reality, what could happen is if we had an incident where we had someone injured in a fire scene and whatnot, they could actually come down and levy fines against the town because we have not held to those standards. So this is why I've asked for this, one of the reasons, and because of the decline of the the participation of the call firefighters during the day has dropped dramatically over the last 5 years.
And another question I had, Ray, or two more. One, Wyndham now runs the fire runs an ambulance. Is that under consideration for Hamilton?
Should be.
I would say not at this time. We need more EMTs. We would need more personnel, which would be an increase in the budget. And I'm talking about more full-time personnel and more consistency with the call department with night coverage. And presently we don't have enough EMTs to do that at this time, and something we'd have to work towards. It also would warrant having with more EMTs it's going to be more of a cost because we do pay for their training, everybody's training, whether they be full-time or call personnel or part-time, as you'd call it, as well.
The other question I wanted to raise is what's your view about exploring merger?
I think it's a necessity in the future. I think we're going to have to look at it with the trend with the call personnel, with the added demands for the fire department, with inspectional services and whatnot. I think we could merge with another community. I think we need to, as I've spoken many times before, I think we need to look at it at a larger aspect throughout the town, and not just the fire department. But I think it's definitely something we need to look at and work towards.
Thank you.
Ray, I had a question. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you had a program in place where you were developing an ambulance service, wouldn't that actually attract EMTs, knowing that they would need to have coverage, they would have coverage 24/7, and also that the ambulance would be a revenue, would it raise some revenue for the department to cover some of those costs, most of them?
Yeah, that's really where you're talking.
Yeah.
You wouldn't raise revenue for the town per se.
No, for the fire.
You would bring revenue back to augment
Fund.
The services that would be needed to actually run this ambulance. So
Yes.
it's kind of like, the dog chasing the tail.
Except that I think the selectmen's main thing is safety and security of the town. That's number one, according to the state.
You're absolutely correct.
And if everyone knew that we were working toward an ambulance, it might be a little bit easier to attract people.
Yeah. I'm not saying I'm not against the idea. I'm saying that we'd need a partnership commitment, with the finance committee, with the selectmen, to have revenues to implement these, more EMTs, and the added expenses that we would need to do it. One needs to come before the other. You can't just put an ambulance in place and then
Right.
expect everything to come.
You have to
The
plan.
revenues to come. It doesn't work. This would
Right.
take careful preparation.
Yes.
Take some time. I have been working towards, the drug licenses that we need. The service zone plan is basically, it's with the state right now. That's being waited to be voted on this month. I've just been talking to our EMS director about the non-transporting Class 5 ambulance license. So we are looking to the future, but I'm very guarded as to how far and how quickly we need to do this. I think that like I said, we need to plan this out properly.
Thank you.
Yep.
Sorry, I just had a question about the personnel. It seems like since we've been running so close to under capacity for firefighters, once you have a new person on board, that will decrease the overtime, decrease the burnout, the fact that with such limited staff, the same staff has to keep coming in, and I would think that having a new person on board would really help with that stress level.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. It would almost be, a breath of fresh air having another person in. What I planned on doing was having that person almost like a floater to cover some of the times that, you know, people are out sick, vacation times. So they would have somewhat of a quasi-set schedule, but it would be a little bit flexible, you know, to cover those things. And, you know, I think that it will help with the overtime and the burnout, as you're saying.
Right, I just think of the stress level, it's such a
Yeah.
necessity to have adequate staffing. I think about you as our new fire chief, protecting your sort of sanity in all this, because you never get 5 minutes of a break to be able to work on other things. It just seems like it's really necessary to.
And if you grew up around it, we're always on call, we're always carrying a pager. I don't know how many times I've been out in the middle of the night, so my firefighters have been out in the middle of the night 2, 3, 4 times, don't get much sleep, and then have to go to work, and especially the call force, where they have to go and they have to, you know, go out to another job where their bosses might be not as sympathetic to that type of part-time position, helping out the townspeople.
Ray, I have a question for you on the merging. I was talking to someone about the possibility of merging, and they indicated that Wyndham backs up Hamilton, and Hamilton backs up Wyndham. And I forget the term. but-
Mutual aid.
They call it a mutual aid agreement. We have it out throughout the state with the municipality of Region 5 here in
But
this
what
area.
they indicated to me was that if Wyndham goes out, you then are do you call people in for a standby?
Sometimes.
Not necessarily, no. Not on a consistent basis like I think you're trying to explain.
So that doesn't happen?
That does not happen.
It doesn't happen on either side?
No, there are instances what we have called line boxes where we have, you know, high, I'm not saying value, high hazard properties where we might have them come on a line box like we use CVS, that type of area, that would be a line box. They'd come, the gas distribution plant, the National Grid's gas distribution plant, Tenneco Gas, you know, if something were to happen there, because of the high hazard, basically it's automatic response.
So
Okay.
so this mutual aid doesn't mean that you fire up when they fire up?
No. It would be, you know, a phone call or a radio call from their dispatch to our dispatch, you know, asking for a specific piece of apparatus to respond, and maybe station coverage or maybe to the scene, depending on the incident.
Thank you.
Joe, if I may ask you. Thank you, Ray.
Can I ask Ray
Oh,
one
I'm
more
sorry.
question
Yeah,
before we
of
go?
course.
Sorry, Ray.
Great.
Put you on the spot here. You're talking about inspectional services and stuff like that with the department. So you're going into Gordon and stuff like that, checking fire extinguishers. and
Fire
that type of stuff.
extinguishers, the safety, you know, the emergency lights, and we do all the fire drills up there, as well as the school fire drills 4 times a year.
Right. We had talked a few years ago, I don't remember if you were here or not, we talked about kind of fees for those
Yep.
inspectional services, and that it seemed like we were doing a lot more than we were getting reimbursed for, with especially Gordon and some other stuff like that, that were up there quite a bit, basically doing stuff for free for them. And there was a talk of raising some of the fee structure, but I don't know if it ever happened, and I don't know if you can speak
That
to
didn't happen on the fire end. We typically do not charge for that type of service. It's not set up in our fee-based schedule that we have. When we go do the yearly inspections and check the fire extinguishers and whatnot, that is, we do that in conjunction with the building department, and they do charge for it, but we have not. And that would be something that, it would be a vote that the selectmen would have to approve to either a charge, there's really no permit per se for that, but it would be a fee for the, you know, the inspector, for the inspector, basically.
I'm just kind of wondering what our outlying cost is for kind of providing that service, as to, you know, you're out there with the truck, you're out there with the man, hours kind of stuff, and what's that balance? Is it just kind of?
Wouldn't be able to apply a fee like that just to Gordon Caldwell. You'd have to
No, it would
apply
be across the board.
So anybody
But
that
the
we do annual
conversation,
inspections for.
the conversation just started because there was a lot of calls and check-ins up there. for false alarms or fire extinguisher checks and stuff like that, and the talk was, you know, can we recoup some of that lost?
That would be an agreement you would have to get with Gordon Conwell. I know that Gordon College does pay Wyndham Fire or the town of Wyndham a certain fee for the amount of calls they go up. I don't know exactly what the agreement is, but that's something that you could talk to the parties over in Wyndham, powers to be over there, how they go about charging for that.
Thank you.
But is that something you can put a value on? So that the town can go then to Gordon and say, look, this is how much it's costing the town, or, you know, this is the value of the services that you're getting.
We could put a fee on it, and, you know, we could figure out what it's actually costing for that. But however, like Joe was saying, you know, someone could turn around, or they actually could turn around and say that, well, that's not unfair because you're not charging, you know, it's not evenly
I think we
based.
would just be asking you for a value, like this is just figuring out, you know, how many times we've been up there, this is the value I put on it, and then up to the town to,
Right, maybe.
to put that into the.
Maybe
Almost-
there's some numbers on how many times you're up to Gordon, and then just the general citizenship, you know, so we get a number of kind of how many times you're out doing these types of things.
Right,
Like,
'cause
you said you do it quarterly or something like that, but, you know, I'm
We
sure
do the fire drills quarterly, but you know, you're also looking at this is public safety. You're trying to keep residents of Hamilton, even though you know it's a college, you're trying to keep residents of Hamilton safe. And if we didn't go up and do these inspections and these checks, then, you know, worst case scenario, you could have a catastrophic incident up
Do
there,
it,
and
definitely
what
do it,
is
yeah.
the cost of life?
Absolutely, right. But
so-
they make a payment in lieu of taxes, they don't pay taxes, so they make a payment in lieu of taxes, and we need to make sure that that's an appropriate
Yeah.
amount, and so we're just
Right.
trying to estimate
Right,
whether that's an
we're not
appropriate
saying to not do it, right? We're
Yeah.
just
No,
wondering-
I would not advocate that one bit.
No, no one is.
Don't either.
Yeah,
We don't even
so,
have to talk about it, so, but we need to make sure that they're paying an adequate amount. And so if they're paying $30,000 a year, and, you know, they're using way more than that in services, then we need to adjust that. That was just a number I made up. That was
Yeah.
pulled out of my
I think
head.
that's a further discussion that, you know, we need to take, you know, elsewhere with that, you know,
Yeah, no,
another forum.
the town needs to do
Yeah.
that, yeah.
okay?
I agree.
Just curious, thank you.
Any other questions?
I just wanted to ask, in conjunction, Ray and Joe together, about merger. What's your sense, Joe, as to how to get this started? We've had
Wyndham won't do
preliminary
it.
discussion on and off with Wyndham FinCom for several years. It's never gone anywhere.
Not with Wyndham.
I'm happy to begin the conversation at the direction of the Board of Selectmen. The issue really is gonna be finding a willing partner, and is Wenham a willing partner? They're in a tough financial position, as bad as our year is this year, our budgetary year is this year, theirs is worse. But, you know, I've had a little.
I had a small talk with a couple of people last week on this. There's less of an appetite for the fire department merging because it's not an obvious savings for both towns.
That's right.
But there may be more opportunity from a police standpoint.
Yep.
Russ and I have had spoken about it, and believes that there's a possibility that there could be a nice savings, but there has to be an open discussion between the police chiefs first to see what does it look like. You know, what does that look like? And I broached it with Joe and Anthony over the last week, and both seemed to be interested, and I was going to follow up and see. We asked that Anthony contact his police chief and have a conversation with Russ, with or without other people, but just so that they can start the conversation, see what that would look like. That seemed to be a more acceptable starting point than fire. Fire, it's less obvious where those savings might be.
That's right.
Would that complicate anything with our ECO and Wenham and Middleton and et cetera? The
Wyndham would
region?
have to come in.
Yeah, I know
It
it's
is,
all things
there are a lot of things that
would
are
have to come
complicated.
in.
I spent
discussed.
a number of years ago, when I was still working at MAPC, MAPC used different people over the course of 5 years to talk to Ashland and Hopkinton about merging their fire departments. And 5 years worth of trying to help them, and it always came down to the same things. One department makes more money than the other department per person, so you'd say, okay, we recommend a budget that equalizes it and brings the lower paid department up. So then immediately the folks in the other department start saying, well, that's not fair, they're getting a raise and all they have to do is join us. That's not fair, where's ours, right? There's a loss of potential for applicability. Right now you have 2 departments, 2 chiefs, 2 deputies, or 2 lieutenants, whatever. You merge the department, part of what you get rid of is some of that hierarchy, and that's where you get some of your savings, but then the officers don't want to stay because then there's nowhere for them to go. I mean, I'm just going to be a patrolman all my life. I don't have a chance to move up. So it becomes difficult, and all these things have to be collectively bargained. I'm happy to have the conversation and start the conversation. Just don't plan on it being something that can happen in a year or 2. It's going to take a lot of time, a lot of negotiation.
It seems we've been having this discussion for as long as I've been around. And I remember sitting down with the FinCom at the COA 3 years ago, or 4 years ago now, probably.
Well, one of the things I think there's a couple of impetuses. If we can find that, and I think a rough estimate might be about $500,000 savings, if that kind of a savings can accrue to the 2 towns, it's significant. 2, there's an opportunity now because Wyndham is in a process. Wyndham's police chief is going to be retiring next May, and yes, it might take longer, but that may stall them getting into that kind of a hiring, and it would allow us to have that conversation. So there's an interest there, but it's not something that, again, we need to be pushing that a little bit, and they've said, yeah, well, let's talk about it.
So if I could offer that one of the easier ways forward might be to start talking about situations like that. Not necessarily merging the departments right away, but talking about, can the departments share a command structure? So instead of pushing for a complete regionalization of the 2 departments and having to impact bargain both collective bargaining agreements with both police unions, et cetera, having to worry about the ECO issue and everything else, you just say, hey, you've got a guy retiring, we have a guy that's a few years away from retiring, what do we talk about? Why don't we talk about sharing a commander and what that would look like? It won't get you the savings right away, but it gets the departments used to working together on budget, working together, normalizing all their operations and their policies and procedures and everything else, and starts to get some trust between that we're not just doing this as a cost-saving measure, because that's another thing that you'll get back when you mention you're only doing this to save money. In the eyes of the worker, that saving money means cutting jobs, eliminating people. If you want to bring people along who are in, well-established organizations that have been around for decades, to bring them into the next evolution, you need to start with things that are attainable, less difficult to talk about.
Unfortunately, Joe, I think you're sort of rebuffing what I've just said.
I'm not trying to.
I think if we get the police chiefs together, they can have that conversation and see what would look like. We don't know.
Yeah.
They would know from a safety standpoint what number of people would be appropriate, and I wouldn't like to just limit it to something.
Sure.
If that is an opportunity, and I think that, and I don't know about speed, but let's talk about at least getting those fire chiefs, the police chiefs together.
Absolutely.
Eric? You're off the hook, Ray.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Ray. Okay. I think we were,
You want to finish talking about,
the book, we just had 1 chapter left, Marissa, other.
The last chapter.
So the other is just gives you a little more information on free cash. So what our certified amount was of $3 million, what we're proposing the free cash used to be for the FY21 budget. As we mentioned in the past, the transfers to the stabilization and the capital stabilization, and then any capital items, and a master plan for $150,000. And that would bring us to a 4.9% of unappropriated free cash balance. And then the other piece, because I do get asked about this a lot, is actually I provided you with the town's outstanding debt for the governmental funds and enterprise funds. I know that I get asked that, when's gonna be the next year that we're gonna see debt rolling off the books. So this just provides you, some information. These are all the bonds that we have outstanding at this point in time. And then it has the outpayment schedule of when they'll be rolling off. We did have some savings in the FY21 budget because in FY20 we had two final payments. I believe one of them was the library, and there was one for the water filtration. So that's what the savings that you see for debt for FY21. But then I don't believe that for governmental, I don't think we're gonna see a significant decrease until 2027. That's when the public safety building rolls off. So we have a few years until we actually see a significant savings. I think there's a couple of like $35,000 payments that will become, that will roll off by 2023, but the big one is not till 2027. So it just gives you a little more information. This is all the debt we have outstanding for governmental enterprise, and this is what the payments schedule looks like.
From we're looking at the, between 20 and 21, it goes from 4.9, almost 5 million, down to.
That's a total due. That 4.95 is just total.
Yes. The 4.9 is the total amount outstanding, and then the 2021 column that you're looking at, that's the annual payments.
That's it.
It's not what's outstanding, it's what we pay on an annual basis.
It's above, it says outstanding as of 2020, not payments due.
After that, it's
Yeah,
roll off.
and then it's just a payment schedule to the right of the $4.9 million. Yeah. And that completes it.
Thank you, Marissa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, we're, got everybody here, if you want to, pretty much everybody here. Sharon George, the interim town clerk, is not here tonight. She was in training today, learning how to use our new voting machines. She and the clerk in there, so they felt very good that they'll be ready for all the elections we have coming up in the next few months. But as she won't be here for most of FY21, I didn't feel it necessary to bring her in.
Just a quick question.
Yes, sir.
On voting, are we going forward with the automated?
Yeah, the Board of Selectmen voted at the last meeting. We're going to have Tuning Technologies come in to do a demo, so we'll get it for free this time.
Nice.
And then,
Oh, the FinCom, I
then we'll
like
have to buy it.
No cost, as a thing.
Yep. We all like that.
Anybody else want to speak who came? Is there any opportunity? But, okay.
I'm sure we all feel badly that we've been watching the stifled yawns and askance looks, and I'm sure we apologize for
We're not more
your
entertaining.
time here. We very much appreciate your being here. Joe, could you speak a bit about the schedule going forward in terms of?
The only thing I didn't bring with me was my notes. So the Selectmen have chosen to close the warrant next Monday. So we'll be planning the agenda for that meeting tomorrow, and closing out what the items that will be on the warrant will be. After the vote on the 10th, nothing new will get added to the warrant, and then we'll spend a period of time to do that. The school, as I mentioned, has a vote on February 12th to vote for a final budget number. We'll make adjustments to what that is. And then we'll get busy trying to formulate the warrant articles and with KP Law. I don't know if they'll be there next Monday or if we'll wait until the 24th to have them start working on kind of putting together. We've got a pretty good idea of what the warrant articles are going to be, aside from if anything comes in from the public. To date, nothing has.
Would you please supply us with a?
Sure. Yeah. It should have.
We're meeting Wednesday.
Yep.
So if you might give me a list.
Yeah, so you got the packet from last week when we opened the warrant, and nothing new's been added after that meeting, I don't recall, right? I'll go back and look at my notes. I'll double check the list that you were given in the packet, David, and then if anything's been added, I'll add to it and send you an updated list.
Thank you.
Okay.
Joe, how and when and what do we do to get to see what the numbers would look like? I'm talking about the school issue, and if we decide to fund up to the 5% as we've discussed a little bit here, and then doing
So, I mean,
difference, what would those numbers look like, and what would the tax rate look like?
so if the two committees vote to accept the budget as proposed tonight, knowing that we're going to work on it some more, that we can, and give me the direction that you want us to, prepare the information so that you can have potential for two budget articles, we can set about doing that. I might hold off on doing the work on the second half until after we see what the
Right.
school committee votes on the 12th, or 18th, whatever night it is, sorry. Once they have that vote, then we'll prepare that second budget article. But if that's the direction that the boards want to go in, give me that direction, and that's what we'll start preparing for the budget.
I mean, do we essentially have no choice but to approve the budget the way it's presented? I mean,
Well, we've
what's
got a
the
choice.
flexibility? I mean, yeah,
To not
what's,
approve it.
You could tell us,
In
you
terms of
know,
school
what,
budget.
yeah, on the school, in terms of school budget, no, you could recommend, we could do one budget article that recommends a dollar amount for the schools, and, you just ignore their request. You could do that. There'll be a challenge on the town meeting floor saying that they want to amend it to such and such. There'll be signs, there'll be, to me, I think that the idea is that you have to get comfortable with what amount of funding you're comfortable with, and that anything beyond that, what we can handle within the budget, is going to have to go to an override. That's going to require a vote at town meeting and at the ballot box. But we need to discern that soon so we can start to prepare both the two budget articles and a possible ballot article for an override.
The articles have to state dollar amounts.
Right.
Not percentages.
Right.
Correct.
So that's part of the quandary here.
Right, exactly. And since we're kind of all in the same room here, and we're talking about that percentage, and we've been kind of kicking around 5% to keep us under our levy just barely, as far as FinCom, have you discussed it at all? We haven't, as a board, discussed it yet about what we're kind of comfortable with, but this might be time to have a little bit of dialogue on is 5% the number that we're all comfortable with, or would it be a lesser or more than 5% to push us over the levy?
I don't think we.
Give us for a,
I know I had it in here.
5%, what would that, what would the impact? Oh, Marissa, have you done anything on that?
There's,
This slide in here.
Have you done anything to look at it? What would happen if it was 5%?
we're, as an aside, if we're gonna be talking schools, is it fair that everyone else can
yeah, I
go
was just gonna say,
home?
let's, yeah, I was gonna say, if we have any questions for any
I
of the
think that's
department
fair.
heads,
All right,
ask
Yeah.
them now or follow up with them
yeah.
soon.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. I think we're done with,
We hope it was entertaining.
yeah.
Thanks, guys.
They felt they could come from. They're like, we're out of here.
Freed from captivity.
So happy.
And kind of as they're walking out, it's a little late because they're on their way out,
Bye.
but just the fact that we don't have a lot of questions for them. Typically, we do have questions for them, but the
It's a good
fact that we don't
presentation.
shows that they've really put a good budget together for us. I mean, I've spent about 4 or 5 hours going through this line by line, and there's really not any wiggle room in this for all these departments. They've done a real good job of bringing it down to a baseline for us so that we can do what we do for the town.
Or below the bare minimum.
Or below the, yeah, exactly.
So if the schools were to increase at 5%, then our estimated tax rate would be about 1707.
Oh, that's a lot.
1,000.
That's
Wow, what a difference.
And that was at 5%,
at
Marissa?
5%.
What's the dollar amount on 5%? I thought we had that in here. Yeah, that.
So it's consistent with what we've been at.
The
relatively
dollar amount
speaking?
meaning
Meaning, what is 5%?
What is
What's
5% of the budget?
increase
Yeah.
or the
Yeah.
total budget?
The 5%
Like seven-
increase
it's
is
like-
equal to how much?
It's like $800,000, something like that?
Yeah,
$934,000.
Was it?
934,000.
944?
934.
Is that 934 for the school?
Yeah.
That would be a
Our
5%
portion.
increase for the schools.
That'd be our, Hamilton's portion.
That would be Hamilton's portion?
Yes.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And it's just the school, they're going up by 5.
Yeah, and I'm not including any debt, because the debt service is like the payments, there's no flexibility there.
It is what it
You know,
is.
it is what it is. But the actual assessment, if the increase
would be 1.2
on just
mil.
the Hamilton's share of the assessment would be an increase of $934,000, which is about 5%, then the estimated tax rate would
Because
be
this would-
about
If you
1707.
add Wyndham's, which is gonna be another.
And how did you come up with the value of the house?
And that would be. and if you
I
add
just
that
used an estimate of
2.5%
2.5% increase on
increase in value.
property values.
Overall.
And what is the 5% due to the levy capacity?
It eats it all up. We have about $880,000.
No, the 5% would not eat it up. We would actually still have
have-
some levy
okay.
capacity.
Have a little bit, but not much,
Much.
right? We're at 900 or something like that?
Well, we were at about
That's why I was thinking of leaving it up.
883 last year.
Right,
Or, I'm sorry, FY '20.
FY '20, right?
If it was at 5%, we would probably be close to a 700.
700, yeah, so close.
But we would have some unused levy capacity, and then, you know, you would see a significant decrease to the tax rate.
That's why we say, from 5 to 7%, there might be a little wiggle room.
Right,
Right.
But
Right, 'cause
very
you're-
little.
very
And
little.
again, anything over 5%, you're gonna start, make zeroing
right, you're
out.
past a levy, you're into the override.
Like at a 9%, you would be using all of the
levy.
unused capacity. You would still need to use you would either need to use more reserves or an override for a smaller amount, and then you would probably be at about 1750.
So if we remain at 2.5 on the town side
Right,
and generously suggest 100% more,
right.
it puts us in a good advocacy position, I think.
We're in there at 7%, basically.
How much were they behind this year?
600,000.
This year that they're trying to fund from?
That was the deficit they came
The
into it with,
deficit.
yeah.
I like
mean,
to.
it came out of their free cash or their,
Well, we don't know, it came from, it's a bottom line budget, so it came from somewhere.
They just got the E&D approved today.
Sam.
It's at $1.3 million.
But they need it to be at 1.6 or something to have any excess that they could use, right?
I don't know if they have a policy on
On E&D.
on
I don't
E&D.
That was in the,
that's what I was thinking.
That is if they had a 5% policies
I don't
that
know
the
if they
town
have
of
any
I don't
policy
know
with
if they
E&D.
do
I
have
don't
any
think they do.
policies as far as that goes. No. But the 5%, I don't know if you recall from last Wednesday's meeting, even their low range was way
Right,
above a
right.
5%.
Right, it was
Right.
10
Yes.
something.
I think it was, what,
Seven.
seven and a half?
Right.
That was what they said too low.
Right.
7 to 9, right.
Well, I like this concept a lot because I think another side benefit to it is the fact that the school committee is responsible for educating the residents of Hamilton on why and how this money's gonna be used. And we avoid getting mixed into, well, you don't really need this teacher or that half-time person or this program. It keeps us out of that whole conversation, which I think is
which we shouldn't be involved in.
no,
I
we
mean,
should, at all.
Education reforms clearly states that the school department, the
years
school
ago.
committee, and the superintendent are responsible for making those decisions. So we're not supposed to be involved in that discussion
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay.
Part of the education that we do have to provide is that how much of a tax increase this is going to be at different levels. Because people may,
Right.
we as
I
a
think that's
town may
valuable.
decide that at 7 $17, whatever that dollar amount was.
Right, we always give the median rate, right,
Yeah,
for
you
the
give a median.
average.
Is
or-
that gonna be a $500 increase? What
Right.
would it be for, if it were a $700 increase, or what is it gonna be if it's a $200 increase? So that people get a sense of, how much am I putting in for this, whatever that level budget we choose? I think that's the education, so that if they come, if we say it would be 5%, and this will cost you $300 on your taxes, and they say, no, it's gotta be this, well, that's gonna cost you $700 on your taxes.
Right.
Yeah,
Right, that breakdown, I think would be good, because like you said, we've been doing our best with putting that on our warrant articles now, what the impact is of the tax rate.
Yeah.
And if we split the same thing with these two warrant articles that we're proposing, and maybe give a tiered thing, maybe there's a $350,000 home, a 500, because of what's our average, 544 or 444 for an average?
Right.
It's $700 is what it is right now, on average, right?
Right, $700, 740 or something
Yeah,
on
something
average,
such,
I
right.
think. But I think if we broke it down a little bit
Right.
more, maybe do 3 tiers of, here's the average home, here's a little bit on the low end, and here's if you're on one of the $1 million houses, here's gonna be the impact of your tax rate.
And I think also, putting an actual estimated tax rate rather than saying 4 cents, people, that doesn't mean anything to people
Say that again?
until, who said that?
Oh,
Nick.
like what? Rosie was just saying, if I can.
You don't know,
reiterate,
I could throw my voice.
that so, just if you were saying that's 5 cents on the tax rate, a lot of people, well,
That is
what
a-
does that quantify?
Right,
5
right.
cents is what? And then we do it per the rate of the house, it's the.
I think that's what
The
Rosie
actual-
just said.
Right, the actual dollar amount has a more
More impactful,
immediacy to it, and that makes a difference. Because I think when you
Make them do math?
When you, well, I mean, there's so much stuff going on at town meeting, and I think if we do sort of estimated actual amounts, it makes people really think a little more carefully for anything we're suggesting.
I think also the 5%, because it ends up with an estimated tax rate of whatever, it was 1707. It's pretty close to the 1698.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you're really drawing a line
Yep.
that, okay,
Right.
5% pretty much keeps your tax rate the same.
Yeah.
Right.
Whereas if the tax rate goes up, you know exactly why.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's,
And
Yeah.
the
Right.
choice is.
Right, and it's, I think it's more I think it adds to the poignancy of how well and how tight we've budgeted operationally as a town.
Exactly.
And not as the school district itself, but as a town. I mean,
Right.
we've been very bare bones for the last 4 or so years here and getting really close, and that's why our free cash has gone down, because we're now allocating it to different things so we can spend it more wisely, but we're getting less free cash because we're budgeting better for what we're spending, and we're getting really close to that line. So there's a push-pull there. If they can see that we're doing more on our side and really kind of, I don't want to say sacrificing, but really working hard at this budget to be fiscally responsible for our citizens, we want to hold the school committee to that same standard.
And Joe, if we can arrange, as we spoke earlier, of some public information education campaign through all sorts of media, whatever's
Yep.
available in advance of town meeting, the voters will be better educated, better prepared, and they won't have that rush of town meeting confusion.
Right. And you guys are going to do your booklet again
Yeah.
this year,
Yep.
correct?
Yeah.
Correct.
That's good. And I think an important point for people, I think something that I certainly didn't understand is that that we're bumping up against this barrier of the 2.5%. And so, we're really close now, and the budget's gonna grow next year, and so this is almost guaranteeing
Overrides in
an
the future.
override situation in coming years.
Right,
which-
and then the issue with that is like your budget jumps 12%. It doesn't go down 8%.
No.
It stays at that, and then it moves up from there, plus.
Can't get rid of an
And
override.
that's the issue I think that some people don't quite understand, is that we'll pay it this year, and next year it might go down.
Right.
It's not
not
gonna
School
go down.
consistently is not.
Overrides never,
It never goes down, yeah.
So it will
not
always be
permanent.
overrides.
And maybe that's something we.
Is the override voted on at town meeting, or is it voted on townwide like a general election?
Both.
Both, it'll have to go, it would have to
Voted at
pass,
town meeting to go on the ballot.
but it will go on the ballot. Yeah, we'd actually have the ballots prepared ahead of time, because your town election's 5 days later, so.
Right.
We'd have it on the ballot already. If it failed at town meeting, it might not matter.
Right.
But if it failed at the ballot, it wouldn't matter if town meeting approved it, so.
So, just so I understand the sequence, at town meeting, let's say the school population comes out and says we want this to go up like it did a
Right.
few years ago.
Right.
And it's gonna go up to 10%, whatever it might be. At that point, we would have to have an override, and we would tell the population that we require an override.
We'll be-
And then
yeah.
it goes to a ballot,
Correct.
and it fails at the ballot.
Then
It
what?
fails.
then it fails.
School budget.
That's part of the reason we want
School
to,
budget fails?
It's a failed budget.
it's a
back
failed
to the-
budget, and then they'll have
They
to go back and change their budget.
What they want, and then it comes back again.
Wow.
And we'd have to have a special,
Town
probably
meeting.
sometime in the
You wanna
summer,
avoid that.
to settle that. And
As you can.
it's part of the reason I like the idea of suggesting 2 different budget. And
Yep.
part of the reason I think it's more defensible at town meeting this year is that, look, this budget is within our means, it's within Proposition 2.5, we can do this. Beyond this, we're gonna need the permission of the voters anyway, so tell us if you like it, but don't put them together, because then it's just gonna create more confusion.
Joe, if they were to move again for consolidation, and if it passed, to the extent in one article, it required us to exceed our capacity, they'd need a vote on the ballot anyway.
Anyway, right. Yep, but we're gonna work hard to frame that question for what the override would be about. If you don't frame an override, it's very difficult to go to the voters and say, we need an override for X thousands of dollars.
Right here.
Just
what-
because.
Give it to us.
If we
Yes,
approve,
nice.
Those generally don't do well.
if we approve the budget and approve the override, and then Wyndham doesn't,
Go
does that
back to the drawing
does
board.
that come
Failed
back to
budget
us
again.
though?
Failed
So
budget.
it'd be similar to what happened last
Does it
year.
go back to us unless it goes over what we've already approved, right?
We have to
Right.
vote
Yeah.
again.
Right,
No, we don't have to vote again, not if it doesn't, not if it goes down.
right. If it
it
goes
goes
down,
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 we have to vote again.
they
Our
just
vote
come
stands.
back
Vote
and,
stands, right?
like they did this year with the OPEB.
Yeah.
We didn't have to have another vote, we just accepted
got our
back
money
the
back,
money
right.
and the
Right.
change.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Well, I want to thank, we all want to thank Marissa and you, Joe. You've done a hell of a job.
Thank you.
Pardon me, a great job.
Yeah.
And we very much appreciate it.
Thank you. It's always a team effort. That's part of the reason I wanted the team to be here tonight. I wish you had a few more questions for them, just so that they could have felt like there was a reason for them to be here. But I appreciate what you're saying. That, the document that we presented to you tonight on the town side is very much been gone over. It's been a collaborative process. We started with the direction to plan on level services, but tell us what you need. And we've taken a lot of those needs out of their requests, out of their initial requests. But that was, a collaboration between the FinCom, the department heads, direction from the Board of Selectmen. And it's important that we're doing this together. It's painful, but at least we're all sharing the pain, so,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Yeah, it's good.
Thank you, Marissa.
I just had a couple of questions.
Okay.
On the compensation table, I saw for a community projects coordinator in there, 19,000. Is that position retitled, changed, et cetera?
Yeah, I noticed that today, and I didn't have a chance to ask Marissa about it. It should be in there as a full-time position.
Yes.
It's
The offer letter
number
is
10 in
58,000,
hourly
right?
positions, community
I
project
think the
coordinator.
table needs to be
Unless they
adjusted.
split the job.
Because I remember we're posting it differently, correct?
Yeah,
So-
well, because we increased it to full-time, to 37 and a half hours. And so we're still at that grade, it's a grade 10, now planned at a step 1. So
So that will have to be adjusted.
that'll have to be adjusted.
And the only other, I mean, I have a bunch of things. I'll follow up with you and Marissa and the appropriate folks later. But the other one was tipping for brick ends is at 45. Have we moved on a agreement contract with Peter and brick ends?
I've drafted an agreement and have it with council. We're trying to get them a document that they can sign so that we can adjust that down.
What's
He
that?
agreed to drop it to
5-0.
40.
He agreed to drop it to 40, but it's in here as 45. I just want to make sure that we're moving forward with that agreement.
I want to get it in writing so that I can.
Yes, get it in writing.
Yeah, exactly.
Which has to go up.
Yeah. Offset something a little bit with that.
Anything else? Jim, you have
Bye.
anything
Well, are we
to
gonna-
say?
We're gonna do something on the split school budget tonight, because I just wanted to mention something, and I'm not saying that I'm advocating for this, but I just wanted to consider, I got at the school,
PowerPoint.
presentation, and their too low category is 7.5 to 8.5%.
Yep.
So I just wanted to consider whether doing a 7.5% increase budget would be a reasonable thing to do, a better way to go about it than 5%. Since that seemed like their absolute bottom of the line, not possible to go below that. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I see what you're saying,
Could be
but
a-
I kind of want to hold their feet to the
An
fire.
amendment to the
To
article.
work harder to get lower than that 7.5.
and work
I think
your
they
way
can do it.
Part of it is the out
If
of,
they came out with a 6, then I would consider, if we have closed the warrant or whatever at that time, to adjust it at that point, if they come back and they say, we've got 6.6 because we saw that you won't accept anything over 5, then we have another conversation maybe, and we change that first article to 6 point, whatever they come up with, if there's no other things. I mean, I don't know if that's something that,
I think
People
that's a good point
consider,
too. It's
or-
another thing that I was.
I know
going
you've
to-
got thoughts on it, because I can see the wheels turning, David.
What's left of it?
I was
What's
gonna
interesting is we're
raise that.
negotiating against ourselves.
Right,
Totally
exactly.
now.
You wanna, you
Right,
wanna
exactly.
stay low.
You know, we are
But I wanted
trying to
to-
stay,
Because
just
someone's
to
gonna-
Trying to stay
point
below
of
our
information,
levy.
but we were having, discussions with Wyndham to try and stay on a kind of a similar path. So we want to be
Yeah.
cognizant of the fact that anything we
Consistent,
do,
You wanna in consort with them.
we're trying to ask them to imitate at their level as best they can, so.
Yeah.
I think 5 is good because we're coming up on several contracts, right? And so we will have personnel increase per se, I'm sure.
Well, we have a contingency in the budget for that.
Right,
but-
we have a contingency for it. But we can see from, I mean, not, our negotiations go the same as the school districts with their teachers. You know, we had requested from them a fair and equal, like we had done at 2%, and they came back at, I can't remember what it ended, it would end up being about 5 point or 6 something with all the other add-ons with it and a step increase.
Right, the COLA was
I
just
found
2.5,
it
but
frankly
it wound
kind
up
of
being.
not surprising that, but they were surprised that teachers had moved into the step that they had added. And I thought, if you give them an opportunity to move a step, they were surprised that 43 or so teachers had moved into that step. And I said, why are you surprised? You've offered it to them.
Right.
Why would they not move into that step if they had the move?
Additional education, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, it was a master's plus something, and it added another little thing, and with the way it works is you can, take a class and get somewhat reimbursement from the school, and then your pay goes up, and it's worth it.
Yeah.
So a lot of people did
People
it.
did it.
Yeah.
What a shock.
Well, I
What
think
a shock.
Yeah, so I think I agree that the 5% is a good number. It's basically, it's the stretch as far as we can stretch, given that there's gonna be growth again next year, and we're gonna be in the same situation of
Right,
having
we'll
to.
be at another override again next year.
But ideally, we would work together with the school and the school committee and come up with a budget that everyone agrees on and recommend it to
Wyndham.
the voters.
Uh,
So,
Remember, there, contrary to prior years where the surface relationships were rocky,
Yeah.
this year, because of the demeanor, things were much more pleasant.
Yes.
But the bottom line,
Is worse. How does
so
that
also.
happen?
the irony.
least
So,
nice of
I
it.
just,
The irony.
as a matter of timing, it would be ideal if we could see what their budget is going to be and then decide,
Yeah.
okay, is that a reasonable budget or not? And then we would make the decision, it's, we can't do that, and we have to do this split budget thing. I
They
think
have
because of the
another-
timing, we can't do
Yeah.
that,
We-
but I
we
think
know
then
that. They
having
wanna-
the foresight to say, well, if they do come to something that is reasonable, then we should be prepared to, agree
Adjust.
with that and, go to the voters together and say this, this is a good
I
budget and
think
you should
Joe
vote for
has
it.
made great efforts in communicating with the superintendent. So it's not as if we are approaching this for the first time.
Right,
Seeds have been sown. Unfortunately, nothing has
right. Agreed.
grown from
Nothing
it.
has
They
germinated.
have another February 12th, they vote to
Yes.
ratify it,
12th,
right, or
February 12th.
accept
The
it?
12th.
They vote to
Approve
approve the
it.
budget.
Yep.
On the
and so-
12th, is that
On the
correct?
12th,
Yeah.
so.
And then we can go from there.
We'll know after the 12th what their number is, and then we'll be able to
Change our
have a
bill.
discussion.
The next Thursday?
No, it just gives us more
Yeah,
information.
yes. I
Yeah.
Next
believe-
Wednesday.
Next
right?
Wednesday,
Wednesday,
next Wednesday.
Thursday. Wednesday, because their meetings are on
Well,
Wednesdays.
Will we be meeting again over the school budget? You know, a joint meeting? Will that be necessary?
Sean and David, maybe refresh me. We talked about that last week.
Jeff and David.
At the joint meeting with the school committee about getting together again once the school committee had adopted its budget.
Right.
We did.
But that we didn't set a date. We
We
talked
did,
about.
we talked at the, I had said, I think we had talked that the chairs would kind of reach out to each other and see if they could find at least a tentative date.
Right.
And, you know, it didn't matter to me. I mean, I think it'd be beneficial if it was full committees, but I think at the least, it would be good to have at least board chairs attend that. You had just, I think, left when we discussed it.
No, but I thought we ended by saying, let's see what you produce.
Let's see what, that was it. I think Alex said, let's see what comes, and then we'll see if we need to go there.
Is there a point if they come back with 10 or 11%?
What's the point?
Is there a point?
Is
Well,
there
if
a
they
point,
don't-
if
if they
they
don't-
come back with, you know, a 10 or 11% budget, is there a point to meeting again?
We can be pointed.
I mean, to your point, is there a point?
Right. No, I think
But
it's a question.
but I think the more opportunity we have to say this isn't going to work, the better. Because in the past, we haven't had a lot of, I mean, I think the door is opened a little bit. The communication is there. It's just not
It's better.
producing any results that we would like, but I think
What I'm saying is that I think we can, if we go to something like that, we can tell them that this
We
is
could
the
say,
way
"Here's what we're gonna do."
We are going to present it this way.
right, I think so.
And that's what I mean by pointed.
And actually, as far as keeping the things more pleasant, I think it does behoove us to go there and tell them in person, this is what we're planning to do and this is why.
Right,
It's
not so they're not blind,
it's-
not that they're gonna be blindsided by
It's,
it, but.
it's not done in a way to suggest that what you're asking for, you don't have your reasons for. It's just so that you know, we don't have the money. And in order to do this budget and get everybody on board, this is the way we have to present.
And also, we look at our own budget, how we've cut and we're streamlining. And yeah, you do have to live within your means. I mean, it's just finite financial capability. And I think that's the bottom line more than anything. Taxes have to be kept down so that people can still afford to live in this town.
I think the big issue, and I think we've seen it, all of us know it, is the 5.8%, 5.6 million of
The
special ed.
out-of-district cost.
Yeah, out of district.
70 kids.
Huge
That's a lot.
number.
Yeah,
Seems unusually
70
high.
kids.
And in addition to that, I mean, to my knowledge, there's no facilities plan. I mean,
No, that's the thing. I mean, we've
Yeah, it's
invested
looming
somewhat
over our
in
head.
some
Yeah.
in-house programming, right? And it has kept I think a small handful of kids in the district, which has helped. But we're still hemorrhaging that out-of-district cost.
exactly.
You know, I'd like to see a much more robust plan to keep whatever level of needs of students we currently have in the district and take some of those from out-of-district and bring them back in. And like you had said before,
Wish they
it
would
can be a
prioritize it.
revenue stream for us, for other kids
That's
coming
one
to us to
possibility,
pay
but the
that
other is-
out-of-district cost.
The other is, because of the condition that we have with no commercial base, there are other towns like that. Does the state require to give us some
Right,
funding for that?
push our representatives.
Yeah, that's what, I mean, it's not a
Lobby
single
them.
We have
Uh,
nothing.
pronged approach, it's a multi-pronged approach. And that's-
Right, and to kind of add to that, I mean, I think it's part of us as public officials to ask those questions to our representatives, but I think it's more so the school district's responsibility
Yeah.
to really push those representatives. You know, we do our part with all the other stuff, kind of operational and whatnot on the town side, and we always try to help out different things, but I think there needs to be a game plan from them to organize either within our district or help with other districts to bring a broader base to that conversation and push
It's
it.
also
to the
going, I mean,
state.
it's also going up $500,000 every year, so it's not just what it is now, it's that it hasn't slowed, it keeps going
Right,
in the wrong direction, so, even with the programs we've added.
right.
So that's why you have a more robust program, a 5-year plan on what they're gonna,
The
so
five-year plan.
like you said, to bring it in-house,
Right.
so.
Right. And I think they're making strides, because when I first got on the board, we were pushing for a capital plan. And they finally they're getting something together now. but there was a lot of years where it was just kind of a laundry list that they had, and no rhyme or reason to when and where and how.
I love the one that was this long, and they said, well, how are we gonna afford it? We'll cut it.
Yeah, we'll just
get
cut it.
rid of it. They got rid of the whole thing.
Yeah,
They couldn't
blew
believe
my
it.
mind.
That was Mike
yeah.
Harvey.
Well, excellent. So, Board, do you have any other questions? Any other?
I think I'm good.
No.
Con, anything further?
Darcy, I'll
Yes, I would
entertain a
like to make a
motion.
motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Con, would you like to join in that?